Hello and welcome back to the Cosmic Enigma. Here we share real-life experiences of encounters with the unknown, stories that come from beyond the stars, crafted to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing just how far this mystery reaches. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Story 1. It wasn't the first time the hallway light flickered at odd intervals. Comings and goings were routine, a shuffle of footsteps that no one bothered to track. The mail piled neatly, except for the one envelope that always seemed to be missing. I didn't turn to see or ask who took it. It simply belonged somewhere else. The room felt a degree cooler than it should have been, and the curtains hung just a bit unevenly. I adjusted the blinds without thinking much of it. When I left, I made sure the blinds were uneven again. The humming started before I could place where it came from. Not electrical, not mechanical, but something in between. A frequency that seemed to live in the walls themselves, vibrating through the floorboards and into my bones. It would stop the moment I focused on it, leaving only the memory of pressure behind my ears. The metallic taste would linger on my tongue for hours afterward, sharp and clean like copper pennies or the air before a storm. Sometimes I'd catch myself running my tongue across my lips, searching for that taste, needing to confirm it had been real. There was breathing that wasn't mine. I know how my chest rises and falls, the rhythm I've carried for decades, but this was different, deeper, slower. It would sync with mine for a few beats, then drift away like two clocks falling out of time. I'd hold my breath to isolate the sound, but silence would rush in to fill the space where it had been. The sensation of eyes watching would remain, though. A weight on my shoulders, a tingle at the base of my neck that made me want to turn around, but never quite gave me the courage to do it. My thoughts began arriving pre-formed, complete sentences that felt foreign in my head. Not my vocabulary, not my cadence. They drop into my consciousness like stones into still water, creating ripples that disturbed everything else I was trying to think about. I'd catch myself nodding in agreement with ideas I didn't remember having, or finding my hand moving to write down numbers that meant nothing to me. The handwriting looked like mine, but the pressure was all wrong, too heavy, like someone else was guiding the pen. The flash came from everywhere at once. Not light exactly, but a sudden absence of darkness that made my vision go white for a heartbeat. In that space between seeing and not seeing, shapes moved, angular, purposeful. The air tasted like burning metal and ozone, so thick I could barely breathe. There was a sound like fabric tearing, but massive, as if the sky itself was being split open. My skin prickled with static electricity, every hair on my arm standing at attention. When my vision cleared, the room looked exactly the same, but felt completely different. The shadows fell at the wrong angles. Now I find myself checking corners obsessively, not looking for anything specific, just checking. My peripheral vision catches movement that isn't there when I turn my head. Mirrors reflect everything they should, but the timing feels off by a fraction of a second, like watching a badly dubbed movie. I've started avoiding reflective surfaces without meaning to, taking longer routes that don't pass storefront windows or the bathroom mirror. My sleep comes in fragments now, broken by the need to verify that my bedroom door is still in the same place, that the walls haven't shifted while I wasn't paying attention. But maybe it wasn't a flash at all. Maybe it was darkness, a sudden weight that pressed down from above like being underwater. The shapes weren't angular but fluid, moving like liquid mercury across surfaces that shouldn't exist. The sound wasn't tearing but a low moan, almost musical, that seemed to come from inside my own chest. My skin didn't prickle but went completely numb, as if I'd been dipped in ice water. The metallic taste was there, though. That part stays consistent across all the versions my mind serves up. The taste and the way my hands shook for hours afterward, fine tremors I couldn't control. I don't try to make sense of it anymore. The trying was making it worse, giving it more space in my head than it deserved. Now I just acknowledge that something fundamental shifted, like a bone that healed wrong after a break. I function around it, adapt to the new geography of my thoughts and perceptions. The humming still comes and goes. The breathing that isn't mine still keeps me company in quiet moments. I've learned to coexist with the certainty that I'm not entirely alone in my own experience anymore. Some doors, once opened, don't close again. Some changes become part of you whether you understand them or not. I've stopped trying to remember everything clearly. Some memories are better left fragmented, incomplete, safely distant from the full weight of whatever they're trying to tell me. Story 2. I had been watching the floorboards, eyes tracing the familiar lines where the wood met the wall. The shadows didn't shift, but something in the air felt charged, like a held breath. Outside, a gust of wind brushed against the windows, a soft murmur that might have been mistaken for an echo. Each tick of the ceiling fan seemed amplified, its rhythm oddly irregular. My gaze caught the edge of the bookshelf where the dust had settled uniformly, untouched. Yet something had changed, an inexplicable lightness in the room. That's when I noticed the single bookmark lying on the floor and that it was never mine. That memory came back to me just now, sitting here in this new apartment, thousands of miles from where it all happened. I've been carrying this story inside me for so long that it feels like swallowing stones. Every time I tried to tell someone, the words would stick in my throat and I'd make some excuse about being tired or distracted, but I can't keep pretending anymore. Something is still with me, even here, even now. I need to start from the beginning, when everything still felt normal. I was house-sitting for a family friend, taking care of their place while they traveled abroad for the summer. It was supposed to be simple: water the plants, collect the mail, make sure everything stayed secure. The house was older but well-maintained, with hardwood floors that creaked in predictable places and windows that caught the afternoon light just right. I'd been staying there for about 3 weeks, settling into a comfortable routine of morning coffee on the back porch and evening reading in the living room. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where people kept to themselves but waved when they saw you checking the mailbox. I liked the solitude. My own apartment had been too cramped, too full of distractions, and this temporary arrangement gave me space to think, to write, to just exist without the constant noise of city life pressing against my skull. During those first weeks, I felt more relaxed than I had in months. I'd wake up naturally without an alarm and spend long hours sitting by the windows, watching the way light moved across the walls. The house had a rhythm to it, the way the floorboards would settle in the evening, how the refrigerator would hum to life every few hours, the soft whisper of air moving through the vents. It felt alive in the way old houses do, full of accumulated time and quiet presence. But then I started noticing things that didn't quite fit the pattern. It began with the bookmark, that first small wrongness that made me pause. I'd been reading in the living room every evening, always using the same leather bookmark I'd carried for years. But there it was on the floor, a thin strip of paper with faded blue edges, definitely not mine. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. There was no writing on it, nothing distinctive, just the kind of generic bookmark you might find in any used bookstore. I assumed it had fallen from one of the books on the shelf, maybe left behind by the previous owners. I should have paid more attention to how my skin prickled when I touched it. The next strange thing happened a few days later. I was in the kitchen making lunch when I heard a sound from upstairs, a soft thud, like something heavy being set down carefully. I stopped stirring and listened, but the house had gone completely silent. Not the normal quiet of an empty place, but an absolute stillness that felt deliberate, held. I called out, asking if anyone was there, feeling foolish even as the words left my mouth. Of course no one answered. I climbed the stairs slowly, checking each room. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it. The beds were made, the curtains drawn the same way, no signs of disturbance. But walking through those upstairs rooms, I felt like I was moving through water, each step requiring more effort than it should. The air felt thick, almost viscous, and I found myself breathing more deliberately, as if I had to remind my lungs how to work. That night, lying in the downstairs guest room where I'd been sleeping, I heard the sound again. This time it was accompanied by what sounded like something being dragged slowly across the floor above me. The sound moved from one end of the house to the other, deliberate and methodical. I lay there with my heart hammering, telling myself it was just the house settling, maybe a tree branch scraping against the roof, but the sound had weight to it, purpose. I didn't go upstairs to check. Over the following days, I started keeping track of these incidents, writing them down in a notebook as if documenting them might make them less unsettling. The sounds upstairs became more frequent, always when I was alone, always when the house should have been empty. Sometimes it was footsteps, slow and measured. Other times it was that dragging sound, like furniture being rearranged. Once I swear I heard what sounded like muffled conversation, voices too low to make out words but clear enough to recognize the cadence of speech. The electronic devices in the house began behaving strangely too. The television would turn itself on in the middle of the night, always tuned to static. The radio in the kitchen would shift stations on its own, cycling through frequencies until it settled on empty airspace, broadcasting nothing but white noise. My phone would lose signal in certain parts of the house, the bars dropping to zero even though I'd had perfect reception there the day before. But it was the mirrors that really started to get to me. The house had several large mirrors, ornate things with heavy frames that reflected the rooms in ways that seemed to capture more than they should. I began noticing that my reflection looked different in them, not dramatically, just slightly off. Sometimes my eyes appeared darker, or my face seemed to be turned at an angle that didn't match how I was actually standing. I'd move my hand, and the reflection would follow a split second too late, like it was copying rather than mirroring. One morning, brushing my teeth in the bathroom mirror, I saw something move behind me in the reflection. Just a quick shift in the shadows, but when I spun around, the bathroom was empty. The shower curtain hung perfectly still, no breeze to disturb it, no logical explanation for what I'd seen. But my hands were shaking as I rinsed my mouth, and I couldn't bring myself to look back at the mirror. I started avoiding reflective surfaces after that, keeping my eyes down when I passed windows at night, covering the bathroom mirror with a towel. But I could still feel them there, those glass surfaces watching, waiting for me to look. The smells started around the same time. It would hit me suddenly, usually when I was moving between rooms, a sweet, metallic scent that reminded me of copper pennies mixed with something organic, something that might have been flowers but felt wrong. The smell never lingered long enough for me to identify its source, but it always left me feeling nauseated, like I'd breathed in something toxic. I began to dread being in the house alone, but I couldn't articulate why. Nothing had actually threatened me. Nothing had hurt me, but I felt constantly watched, constantly followed by a presence that stayed just outside my peripheral vision. When I sat reading in the living room, I'd feel eyes on me from the staircase. When I cooked in the kitchen, I'd sense something standing just behind me, close enough that I should have been able to hear it breathing. The pressure in my chest started then, a tight sensation like someone was pressing their hands against my ribs. It was worst near anything electronic, the television, the microwave, even my laptop. The devices seemed to generate a field of wrongness that made my skin crawl and my teeth ache. I'd find myself holding my breath around them, as if the air itself had become contaminated. Sleep became impossible. Even with my eyes closed, I could feel the house moving around me, shifting and rearranging itself in ways that defied physics. I'd drift off only to wake with the certainty that someone had been standing beside the bed, watching me sleep. The guest room began to feel smaller each night, the walls pressing inward, the ceiling lowering until I felt like I was being buried alive. That's when I started hearing the humming. It began as a low frequency, barely audible, like the sound of electrical wires under stress. But gradually it grew louder, more complex, developing harmonics and overtones that seemed to vibrate inside my skull. The sound had no obvious source. It wasn't coming from the walls or the floors or the ceiling, but from everywhere at once, as if the house itself had developed vocal cords. The humming would shift pitch throughout the day, sometimes dropping so low I felt it more than heard it, other times rising to frequencies that made my ears ring, but it never stopped. Even when I left the house to run errands or take walks, I could still hear it faintly, like an echo that had embedded itself in my auditory nerves. I tried calling the family who owned the house, thinking maybe there was some kind of electrical problem they should know about, but every time I dialed their number, the call would drop before connecting. My phone would show full bars, but the calls simply wouldn't go through. When I tried using the landline, I'd get a busy signal, or sometimes just dead air, as if the phone lines had been cut. That's when I realized I was truly alone. The isolation felt deliberate, orchestrated. I was being kept separate from the outside world, held in place by forces I couldn't understand or fight. The house had become a container, and I was something being preserved inside it, studied, observed. Every room felt like a display case, every mirror like a window for unseen watchers. The breaking point came on what I now think of as the last normal night. I was lying in bed, listening to the humming that had become as constant as my own heartbeat when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Not the usual careful, measured steps I'd grown accustomed to, but normal human footsteps, casual and unhurried. Someone was walking up to the second floor like they belonged there, like they lived there. I sat up, straining to hear more. The footsteps moved across the upstairs hallway, pausing at what I knew was the master bedroom door. Then I heard it open, the distinctive squeak of hinges that needed oil. Someone had entered the room directly above me. For several minutes there was silence. Then the footsteps resumed, moving around the upstairs rooms with familiarity, checking things, arranging things. I could hear drawers opening and closing, the soft thud of objects being moved. Someone was making themselves at home up there. I crept out of bed and moved to the bottom of the stairs, looking up into the darkness of the second floor. A thin line of light was visible under one of the doors' light where there should have been none, since I hadn't turned on any upstairs lights in days. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding small and strange in the heavy air. The sound stopped immediately. Complete silence fell over the house, but it wasn't empty silence. It was the quiet of someone holding perfectly still, listening, waiting. I climbed the stairs. The light was coming from under the master bedroom door, a warm yellow glow that flickered slightly like candlelight. I pressed my ear to the door and heard what sounded like papers rustling, the soft scratch of a pen on paper. Someone was writing in there. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was empty, completely, impossibly empty. No lights were on, no candles burning. The moonlight coming through the windows was the only illumination, casting everything in silver and shadow. But I could still hear the writing sounds, the rustling paper, even though there was no one there to make them. That's when I saw the photographs. They were scattered across the bed, dozens of them, all showing the same subject, me. pictures of me sleeping in the guest room below, pictures of me reading in the living room, pictures of me standing in the kitchen, brushing my teeth, sitting on the back porch, all taken from impossible angles as if the photographer had been floating or standing in places where no person could stand. In every photograph I was alone, but in every photograph there was something else, a shadow that didn't match any object in the room, a reflection in a window that showed more than what should have been there, a darkness gathered in corners that seemed to have substance and weight. I was being documented, catalogued, studied like a specimen. My hands were shaking as I gathered up the photographs, but they felt strange to the touch, too warm, almost alive. The paper had a texture like skin, and looking at them too long made my vision blur and my stomach turn. I stuffed them into my pockets, not knowing what else to do, and backed out of the room. The house felt different as I made my way downstairs. The walls seemed closer, the air thicker. The humming had changed pitch, becoming more urgent, more insistent. It felt like a countdown, like time was running out for something. I packed my things in a frenzy, throwing clothes and books into bags without any organization. I had to get out. I had to leave that place before whatever was watching me decided to do more than just observe. But as I reached for the front door, my hand stopped. I couldn't turn the handle, not because it was locked or stuck, but because my body simply wouldn't obey. My arm felt heavy, paralyzed, as if someone else was controlling my movements. I stood there for what felt like hours, struggling against my own muscles, fighting to make my hand close around the door handle. The humming grew louder, filling my head until I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. The sweet metallic smell flooded my nostrils, so strong now that I gagged and doubled over. Then suddenly it stopped. The humming cut off mid-note, the smell dissipated, and my hand closed around the door handle like nothing had been preventing it. I yanked the door open and stumbled out into the night air, gasping and shaking. I drove away without looking back, but I could feel something watching me go, something disappointed but patient, as if it knew I'd return eventually. I never did go back to that house. I called the family from a hotel the next morning, told them there had been a family emergency and I had to leave immediately. They were understanding, even apologetic for the inconvenience. They said they'd cut their trip short and come home early. I never asked them if they experienced anything unusual when they returned. But leaving didn't end it. The photographs I'd taken from the bedroom disappeared from my pocket sometime during that first night away, though I never remembered taking them out. The humming followed me for weeks, always just at the edge of hearing, especially when I was around electronic devices. Mirrors still make me uncomfortable, and I can't shake the feeling that my reflection is slightly out of sync, slightly wrong. I moved across the country, changed jobs, started a new life. I told myself I was running towards something, not away from it. But the truth is, I've never stopped feeling watched. In every apartment I've lived in since, in every room I enter, there's always a moment when the air feels charged, when the shadows seem to shift just outside my vision. Sometimes I find things that aren't mine, a pen I've never seen before, a book moved from where I left it, small objects that appear and disappear like gifts or messages from something that refuses to let me forget. The worst part is the dreams, not nightmares exactly, but dreams where I'm back in that house, back in those rooms, and everything feels normal again. In the dreams, I understand why I was being watched, why I was being documented. I'm part of something larger, something that needs me to return, to complete whatever process was started. I wake up from these dreams with the taste of copper in my mouth and the certainty that I'm not alone in the room. Even now, sitting here trying to tell this story, I can feel something behind me, patient and persistent, waiting for me to stop fighting and come home. The bookmark appeared on my desk this morning. The same faded blue paper, the same texture that feels too warm under my fingers. I haven't touched a physical book in months, haven't been to a bookstore or library. But there it was, placed carefully beside my laptop like a calling card, like a reminder. I think I'm starting to understand that distance doesn't matter. Geography is irrelevant. Whatever found me in that house has marked me, claimed me, made me part of its collection. I can run as far as I want, but I'll always be carrying it with me, carrying that house and everything in it like a scar that never heals. The humming is getting louder again. My reflection in the bathroom mirror this morning looked wrong, turned at an impossible angle. And I swear I can smell that sweet metallic scent drifting through the ventilation system of this new apartment, even though I know that's impossible. I'm telling you this story because I need someone else to know, to carry part of it so I'm not alone with it anymore. But I'm also telling you because I think it's almost time for me to go back. The dreams are becoming more insistent, more detailed. I remember things now that I didn't remember before, conversations I never had, rooms in that house I never saw, photographs of myself doing things I never did. I think I left something behind, or something was left in me. Either way, the collection isn't complete, and I can feel it calling me home, patient but insistent, like a held breath that needs to be released. The bookmark is still on my desk. It's moved closer to my laptop since this morning, and I swear it's gotten warmer. When I look at it too long, I can almost see writing appearing on its surface, faint words that fade before I can read them. I think they're directions. I think they're telling me how to find my way back. And the terrible truth is, part of me wants to follow them. Story 3. It wasn't the first time the window was open in the morning. The curtains barely shifted, hanging more out of habit than function. A stray leaf lay on the floor, despite the room being sealed tight the night before. I swept it into the bin without a second thought. The air felt a touch cooler, but the thermostat showed no change. I straightened the cushions on the couch, noting the slight indentation in one of them. The remote control was exactly where it should have been, untouched since yesterday. When I left the room, I made sure to close the door softly. I didn't mind if it stayed ajar. Nothing unusual happened that night. I want to make that clear from the start. People sometimes ask me about it, and I tell them the same thing every time. There's nothing to tell. I slept fine. I always sleep fine. The house was quiet, just like it always is after midnight. The neighbors were probably asleep too, though I wouldn't know because I wasn't looking out the windows or anything like that. I didn't see anything. Why would I? The bedroom faces the backyard, and there's nothing back there except grass and that old oak tree. Sometimes the wind moves the branches around, casting shadows on the wall, but that's perfectly normal. Everyone knows trees do that. The shadows were just shadows, moving the way shadows move when there's wind, even though I don't remember there being any wind that night. It was just my imagination anyway. The human mind plays tricks when you're tired, and I'd been working late that week. Stress does things to your perception. Makes you think you hear sounds that aren't there, like that soft humming noise that seemed to come from outside, but it was probably just the air conditioning unit from next door. Those things make all kinds of noises when they cycle on and off. The humming had a rhythm to it, almost melodic, but that's just how some machines sound when they're running properly. I definitely didn't get up to check. There was no reason to check anything because nothing was happening. I stayed in bed the whole night, covers pulled up to my chin, eyes closed. Sleep came easily, just like it always does. I didn't stand by the window for 20 minutes watching the backyard. I didn't press my face against the glass, feeling how cold it was despite the warm night. The condensation from my breathing didn't fog up the window in small, quick bursts, because I wasn't breathing fast or anything like that. The light in the backyard was just streetlight spillover. That's all it could have been. Our neighborhood has those tall sodium lights every few houses, and sometimes the glow carries farther than you'd expect. It wasn't moving or anything weird like that. Lights don't move unless there's something wrong with the bulb, and there was nothing wrong with any bulbs. The way it seemed to pulse, getting brighter and dimmer in a steady pattern, was probably just my eyes adjusting to the darkness. Eyes do that automatically. I must have been dreaming when I thought I saw the shape near the tree. Dreams feel real sometimes, especially when you're in that space between sleeping and waking. The shape was tall, maybe 7 feet, but dreams distort proportions all the time. It didn't have arms or legs in any normal sense, more like extensions that moved independently of each other. But that's exactly the kind of impossible thing that happens in dreams. The way it seemed to bend without joints, flowing like liquid but maintaining its form, that's dream logic for you. It must have been a dream because I know I never opened the back door. The deadbolt was still locked in the morning, just like I left it. I checked it twice before bed, the way I always do. The chain was still in place too, so there's no way I could have stepped outside onto the patio, feeling the cool concrete under my bare feet. The night air wasn't crisp against my skin. I wasn't standing there in my pajamas, 20 feet away from something that shouldn't exist. The sound it made wasn't really a sound at all, more like the absence of sound, if that makes sense. You know how sometimes when it's very quiet, you can hear the quiet itself? It was like that, but deeper, like the air was holding its breath. I could feel it in my chest, this pressure that made my heartbeat seem too loud. But I was asleep, so my heart rate was probably just elevated from whatever dream I was having. I never got closer to it. Why would I? Even in a dream, you maintain some sense of self-preservation. The grass was wet with dew, soaking through my pajama bottoms as I walked across the yard. Each step made a soft, squelching sound in the damp earth. The oak tree's trunk felt rough against my palm when I used it to steady myself. The bark slightly warm despite the cool night. But none of that happened because I was in bed the entire time. When it turned toward me, I didn't see a face. There wasn't anything to see, really. Just a smooth surface that somehow conveyed attention, like being watched by something that doesn't have eyes but knows you're there anyway. The knot face tilted slightly, the way someone might when they're curious about something. I could feel it studying me, taking in details, filing them away for later use. But that's just the kind of paranoid thought you have in nightmares. It didn't speak. I want to be clear about that because some people think these things communicate, but this one didn't. There were no words, no sounds, no telepathic messages or anything like that. Just this sense of understanding passing between us, like when you make eye contact with a stranger and somehow know they're thinking the same thing you are. The understanding was simple. It knew I was there, and I knew it was there, and that was enough for now. I didn't reach out to touch it. That would have been crazy, even in a dream. My hand didn't extend toward that smooth, dark surface. I didn't feel the texture under my fingertips, like warm metal that had been sitting in sunlight, even though it was the middle of the night. The surface didn't yield slightly under pressure, like it was made of something between liquid and solid. My palm didn't come away tingling with a sensation I'd never felt before and haven't felt since. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds. Dreams compress time in strange ways, so it could have been longer or shorter. I wasn't standing there for what felt like hours, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. The thing wasn't studying me with that patient, alien attention. We weren't just existing in the same space, acknowledging each other's presence in a way that felt more real than most of my waking interactions with other people. When it left, it didn't walk away. It just wasn't there anymore, like someone had turned off a light. One moment I was looking at this impossible shape, and the next I was staring at empty space near the oak tree. The absence felt as significant as the presence had been. The night seemed louder afterward, full of the normal sounds I hadn't noticed while it was there. crickets chirping, leaves rustling, the distant hum of traffic from the main road. I went back inside immediately. Well, I would have if I'd actually been outside, which I wasn't. The back door closed with its usual soft click. The deadbolt turned easily, and I replaced the chain with hands that weren't shaking at all. My feet weren't wet from the grass. I didn't need to change my pajama bottoms because they weren't damp and grass-stained. I went straight back to bed and fell asleep within minutes, the way you do after waking from a particularly vivid dream. The next morning, everything was normal. The backyard looked exactly the way it always does. Green grass, oak tree, wooden fence separating our property from the neighbors. No strange impressions in the earth, no areas where the grass seemed flattened or disturbed. I didn't spend 20 minutes examining every inch of the yard, looking for evidence of something that was never there in the first place. I didn't find the circular impression near the base of the oak tree. It wasn't about 4 feet in diameter, pressed into the earth like something heavy had been resting there. The grass inside the circle wasn't slightly yellowed, as if it had been exposed to heat or some kind of radiation. I didn't kneel down and place my hand in the center of the impression, feeling how the soil was still warm hours after sunrise. Work was normal that day. I got dressed, had coffee, drove to the office just like always. Nobody commented on my appearance because there was nothing to comment on. I wasn't pale or tired looking. My hands weren't shaking when I tried to type. I didn't have trouble concentrating on simple tasks because my mind kept drifting back to something that didn't happen. Sarah from accounting asked if I was feeling okay. I told her I was fine because I was fine. She said I seemed distracted, but people say things like that all the time. It doesn't mean anything. I wasn't replaying the events of the night over and over, analyzing every detail, trying to make sense of an experience that never occurred. The way Sarah's eyes lingered on my face suggested she thought I was lying, but she didn't press the issue. I didn't research anything online that day. Why would I? There was nothing to research. I certainly didn't spend my lunch break reading about unexplained sightings and strange encounters. Those websites are full of crazy stories from people who can't tell the difference between dreams and reality. The accounts I read weren't remarkably similar to my own non-experience. The details didn't match up in ways that made my skin crawl. That night I went to bed at my usual time. I didn't check the locks 3 times instead of 2. The bedroom curtains were closed properly, not left open a crack so I could see the backyard. I didn't lie awake listening for unusual sounds. Sleep came naturally, and I didn't dream about smooth, dark surfaces or the feeling of being observed by something that doesn't exist. But I did wake up around 3 in the morning, not because of any noise or disturbance, just one of those random wake-ups that happen sometimes. I didn't immediately look toward the window. My heart wasn't beating faster than normal. The room felt perfectly comfortable, not charged with some kind of electric tension that made my skin feel too tight. I didn't see the light in the backyard again. The glow wasn't there, pulsing with that same steady rhythm. It wasn't brighter than the night before, more focused, like whatever was producing it had moved closer to the house. The oak tree's silhouette wasn't framed against that impossible radiance. I didn't count the seconds between pulses, discovering they matched my heartbeat exactly. The shape wasn't back either. The space near the tree was empty, just like it should be. There wasn't a taller figure this time, maybe 8 feet in height, with those same flowing extensions but more defined somehow. It wasn't moving in slow, deliberate patterns that seemed almost like a dance. I wasn't watching it perform some kind of ritual or ceremony that human minds aren't equipped to understand. I stayed in bed and went back to sleep. I didn't get up, didn't go to the window, didn't spend another hour pressed against the glass watching something that couldn't possibly be there. My reflection in the window didn't look strange, pale, and wide-eyed with an expression I didn't recognize. The The face staring back at me wasn't someone I'd become over the course of 2 nights, changed by experiences I never had. This pattern didn't continue for the rest of the week. Every night was perfectly normal, with normal sleep and normal dreams about normal things. I wasn't developing a routine of midnight observations. The thing in the backyard wasn't returning regularly, always slightly different, always a little more present than the time before. I wasn't starting to anticipate its arrival, checking the window throughout the evening, waiting for that first pulse of light. The weekend came and went without incident. I did yard work, cleaned the house, ran errands. Everything was exactly as it should be. I didn't avoid the area near the oak tree while mowing the lawn. The grass there didn't feel different under my feet, spongier somehow, like the earth beneath it had been altered. When I trimmed the lower branches, I didn't notice that the bark on one side of the trunk had a different texture, smoother and darker than the rest. My neighbor Jim came over to borrow my hedge trimmer. We chatted about normal neighbor things, the weather, property taxes, the new family that moved in down the street. He didn't mention seeing any unusual lights in my backyard. He didn't ask if everything was okay at my house because there was no reason for him to ask. The way he kept glancing toward the oak tree was probably just coincidence. Jim did say something strange as he was leaving, though. He mentioned that his dog had been acting weird lately, whining and pacing near the fence that separates our properties. Dogs are sensitive to all kinds of things humans don't notice: changes in barometric pressure, high-frequency sounds, underground vibrations. It didn't mean anything specific. The fact that his dog refused to go outside after dark was probably unrelated to anything happening in my yard. I didn't start sleeping in the guest room that faces the front of the house. There was no reason to change rooms because nothing was wrong with my bedroom. I wasn't trying to avoid seeing the backyard at night. The guest room bed wasn't less comfortable than my own, and I didn't lie awake anyway, listening for sounds from the back of the house. Every creak and settling noise wasn't amplified by the knowledge that something was out there waiting. The dreams started around then, but dreams are just dreams. Everyone has strange dreams sometimes. Mine weren't particularly vivid or memorable. I didn't dream about standing in a place that wasn't quite my backyard, but wasn't anywhere else either. The sky in these dreams wasn't that deep purple color you never see in real life. The ground wasn't covered with something that looked like grass, but felt like sand under my bare feet. In the dreams, there were more of them. Not just one shape near the oak tree, but dozens scattered across an endless landscape. They weren't all the same size or configuration. Some were tall and narrow, others broad and low to the ground. A few seemed to shift constantly, never maintaining the same form for more than a few seconds. But it was just dream imagery, the kind of nonsense your brain creates when it's processing random information. The one from my backyard wasn't there in the dreams. I could tell because I'd become familiar with its particular way of moving, the rhythm of its attention. This one was different, older somehow, more settled in whatever it was they did. When it approached me in the dream, I didn't feel the same curiosity I'd sensed from the backyard visitor. This one already knew everything it needed to know about me. It didn't show me things. Dreams don't work that way, with clear information being transmitted from one consciousness to another. I didn't see images of my house from above, from an angle that would be impossible for any earthbound observer. The view didn't zoom in through my bedroom window, showing me sleeping peacefully while something stood at the foot of my bed. My dream self didn't watch this scene with perfect clarity, understanding that it wasn't a dream at all but a memory. I woke up in the guest room, which was normal because that's where I'd been sleeping. My heart wasn't pounding, and I wasn't covered in sweat despite the cool temperature. The house was quiet around me, full of the familiar sounds of settling wood and humming appliances. I didn't hear footsteps in the hallway outside my door, slow and deliberate, like someone was walking very carefully to avoid making noise. The footsteps didn't stop outside the guest room door. There wasn't a long pause, as if whoever was there was listening for signs that I was awake. The door handle didn't turn slowly, so slowly that I had time to close my eyes and pretend to be asleep. Nobody entered the room and stood beside the bed, close enough that I could feel their presence like heat from a radiator. I didn't open my eyes to see the shape looming over me, taller than the ceiling should have allowed, bending at impossible angles to fit in the space. Its knot face wasn't inches from mine, studying me with that patient, alien attention. I couldn't feel its breath because it didn't breathe, but there was something like air movement, cool and oddly scented, like metal and ozone, and something organic I couldn't identify. The touch on my forehead was just part of the dream, a light pressure, neither warm nor cold, that seemed to spread through my entire body. It didn't feel invasive or threatening, more like being scanned by some kind of gentle machine. Information wasn't being gathered, cataloged, stored for future reference. I wasn't being measured and evaluated according to criteria I couldn't understand. When I woke up for real, it was morning. Sunlight was streaming through the guest room windows, and I could hear birds chirping outside. Everything was perfectly normal. I wasn't lying in exactly the same position I'd been in all night, as if I hadn't moved once during the entire 8 hours. My body wasn't stiff and sore, like I'd been held in place by something stronger than sleep paralysis. There wasn't a mark on my forehead where the touch had occurred. The skin wasn't slightly discolored, a faint circular impression that looked almost like a bruise but didn't hurt when I pressed on it. I didn't spend 15 minutes in the bathroom mirror, examining the mark from different angles, trying to convince myself it was just a shadow or a trick of the light. I went back to sleeping in my own bedroom after that. The guest room had been fine, but there was no reason to stay there permanently. My bedroom was more comfortable, and I slept better in familiar surroundings. I wasn't trying to prove anything to myself or to whatever might be watching from outside. The fact that nothing appeared in the backyard for several nights running was just coincidence. But last night was different, not because anything happened, but because I realized how quiet the house has become. I used to hear all kinds of sounds, the refrigerator cycling, the heating system coming on, pipes expanding and contracting. Now there's just silence, the kind of deep quiet that feels deliberate, like something is absorbing all the normal household noises, creating a bubble of stillness around me. I didn't wake up this morning to find the back door standing wide open. The deadbolt wasn't still locked, which would have been impossible if the door was open. The chain wasn't hanging loose, swaying slightly in the breeze that moved through the house. I didn't stand in the doorway looking out at the backyard, trying to understand how I could have secured the door from the inside while it was simultaneously open to the outside. The grass isn't dying in a pattern that radiates out from the oak tree. The brown patches don't form concentric circles, getting larger each day. I'm not watching this process from my bedroom window, documenting the progression with a kind of horrified fascination. The tree itself isn't changing, its leaves turning silver instead of their normal green, its bark developing that same smooth, dark texture I felt that first night. Everything is perfectly normal. I go to work, I come home, I eat dinner and watch television and go to bed at reasonable hours. People don't avoid me in the hallways at work. My reflection in mirrors doesn't look different, older somehow, like I've aged months in the span of weeks. When I speak, my voice doesn't sound strange to my own ears, flatter and more monotone than it used to be. I'm not changing. The experiences I never had aren't affecting me in ways I can't fully understand. I don't catch myself staring at nothing for minutes at a time, lost in thoughts that don't feel entirely like my own. My dreams are normal dreams about normal things, not extended visits to places that exist somewhere between sleep and waking, where impossible beings conduct incomprehensible business in landscapes that hurt to look at directly. Tonight will be like any other night. I'll lock the doors, close the curtains, and go to bed at my usual time. I won't lie awake listening for the sound of something moving through the house, footsteps that are too light and too regular to be human. The bedroom door will stay closed all night, and nothing will enter to stand beside my bed, watching me with attention that feels more intimate than touch. I won't wake up tomorrow morning with new knowledge I didn't have before, understanding things about the world that humans aren't supposed to understand. The mark on my forehead isn't getting darker and more defined each day. When I press my finger to it, it doesn't pulse with a rhythm that matches something moving through the house after midnight. Everything is fine. Everything has always been fine. The window is closed tonight and it will stay closed. The curtains are drawn tight, blocking any view of the backyard where nothing ever happens. I've checked the locks twice and they're secure. Nothing can get in and nothing can get out. But I can hear them gathering outside now. They're not voices creating harmonies that bypass my ears and resonate directly in my bones. Story 4. The initial inventory inspection commenced at 1800 hours. Rows of identical boxes line the shelves, each barcode meticulously recorded. Scanning devices showed all items present and accounted for according to the digital ledger. Temperature controls remained constant, unwavering between documented check-ins. Dust gathered in corners, undisturbed by recent movements. An unopened delivery sat inconspicuously by the entrance, logged but lacking a corresponding dispatch record. All lights functioned properly, though the power indicator flickered irregularly. Exit routes were unobstructed, yet the motion sensors failed to register any activity. The air vent emitted a low hum, yet the security footage looped back 2 minutes. I started having the dream after what I thought was just another routine shift. The kind of dream that feels like nothing at first, then lingers like smoke in a room you've already left. I'd wake up with this strange taste in my mouth, metallic and clean, like I'd been breathing recycled air all night. In the first dream, I was lying in my bed, but something was wrong with the ceiling light. It wasn't the warm yellow bulb I'd grown accustomed to, but something else entirely. An oval light, unmoving but pulsing like a breath, always above me. The light had this quality that made everything else in the room seem muted, like I was looking at my own bedroom through frosted glass. There was a sound too, a constant hum, like someone was modulating a frequency only I could hear. It reminded me of the air conditioning unit at work, but cleaner somehow, more deliberate. I remember trying to move my head to look away from the light, but my neck felt heavy, unresponsive. Then I woke up. I chalked it up to stress. Work had been demanding lately, lots of inventory checks and system updates. The mind processes things in strange ways when you're tired, I told myself. Dreams are just the brain's way of filing away the day's experiences, mixing them up into something that feels significant but ultimately means nothing. But the dream came back. The second time it lasted longer. The oval light was there again, pulsing in that same rhythmic pattern, but now I could feel something else. A presence maybe, or just the sensation of being observed. The humming sound grew closer, more complex, layered with what might have been a voice. Metallic, distant, speaking words I couldn't quite make out, like trying to tune into a radio station that's just slightly out of range. I felt as if I were being lifted, though no part of my body moved. It was the strangest sensation, like floating in water but without the wetness, without the resistance. My arms remained at my sides, my legs straight, but somehow I was rising toward that pulsing light. The voice grew clearer, though the words still escaped me. They felt important, urgent even, but they dissolved the moment I tried to focus on them. When I woke up this time, my sheets were damp with sweat, and there was that metallic taste again, stronger now. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I looked tired, more tired than I should have after 8 hours of sleep. There were dark circles under my eyes and something else, a small mark on my neck just below my left ear. Probably from sleeping wrong, I reasoned. A pillow crease, or maybe I'd scratched myself in my sleep. The next few days passed normally, or what I thought was normally. I went to work, completed my tasks, came home, watched television, went to bed, but I started noticing things, small things that didn't quite fit. My coffee mug was in the wrong cabinet one morning. I always kept it in the cupboard above the coffee maker, but there it was, sitting alone in the cabinet by the sink. I must have put it there without thinking, muscle memory playing tricks on me. It happens to everyone. Then there was the issue with my phone. The battery would drain faster than usual, and sometimes I'd find apps open that I didn't remember using. The voice recorder was active once, showing a 2-hour recording from the middle of the night. But when I played it back, there was nothing but silence, occasionally broken by what sounded like that same humming from my dreams. I deleted the recording. There was probably a logical explanation. Phones malfunction all the time, especially older models. Software glitches, background processes running wild, pocket dials that somehow activated the recorder. Technology isn't perfect. But the dreams continued, and they were changing. The third dream was more vivid than reality itself. The oval light was brighter now, and I could see details in it that shouldn't have been possible. Geometric patterns shifting within the glow, like looking at a kaleidoscope made of pure illumination. The humming had become a symphony of electronic tones, rising and falling in waves that seemed to match my heartbeat. The voice was clearer now too, still metallic, still distant, but I could make out fragments, words like procedure and integration and subject responsive. They felt clinical, detached, like someone reading from a medical chart. I tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but my voice wouldn't come. My throat felt numb, disconnected from my will. The sensation of floating was stronger this time. I could feel myself moving through space, though the bedroom walls remained stationary around me. It was as if I existed in two places at once, my physical body lying on the bed while something else, some other version of me, drifted upward toward the source of that impossible light. A sharp scent filled the air, like ozone after a storm, but cleaner, more artificial. It reminded me of the smell in hospitals, that sterile antiseptic odor that seems to coat everything. But there was something else underneath it, something I couldn't identify, something that made my skin crawl even though I couldn't move to scratch the sensation away. I woke up gasping, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The room was dark, the familiar yellow bulb overhead dormant and ordinary, but the smell lingered. That clean, artificial scent hung in the air like a ghost of the dream, fading slowly as I became fully conscious. I got up to open a window, needing fresh air to clear my head. That's when I noticed the mark on my neck had changed. It wasn't a simple crease anymore, but a small, perfectly circular red spot. It didn't hurt, didn't itch, but it was definitely there, definitely real. I convinced myself it was a bug bite. Mosquitoes can get into houses, especially during the warmer months, or maybe it was a reaction to my laundry detergent. Skin can be sensitive to chemical changes, and I had recently switched brands. There were a dozen reasonable explanations for a small red mark on my neck. But the explanations were getting harder to believe. The dreams began to bleed into my waking life in ways that made me question my own perception. I'd be sitting at my desk at work, concentrating on inventory reports, when I'd hear that humming sound. Just for a few seconds, barely audible above the normal office noise, but unmistakably the same frequency from my dreams. I'd look around to see if anyone else noticed, but my coworkers continued typing, talking on phones, going about their business as if nothing had happened. The air conditioning unit would kick on, and I'd tell myself that's all it was. Similar sounds, my brain making connections that weren't really there. But then I'd catch glimpses of light in my peripheral vision. Not the harsh fluorescent lighting of the office, but something softer, more focused. When I'd turn to look directly, there would be nothing there. Just the normal workspace, the normal fixtures, the normal day proceeding as it always did. I started losing track of time. I'd sit down to work on a project, and what felt like minutes later, I'd notice hours had passed. My computer screen would show completed tasks I didn't remember doing, emails sent in my name with responses that seemed perfectly appropriate but felt foreign to me. It was like discovering someone else had been living my life during moments I couldn't account for. The worst part was the silence, not the absence of sound, but a particular quality of quiet that would descend without warning. The office noise would continue around me, people talking, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, but it would all seem muffled, distant, like I was hearing it through thick glass. During these moments, that metallic voice would whisper at the edge of my consciousness, speaking words I still couldn't quite grasp, but somehow understood were meant for me. I started keeping a journal, trying to document these experiences, to find patterns that might explain what was happening. But when I'd read back what I'd written, the entries would describe events I didn't remember recording. Detailed accounts of dreams within dreams, conversations with voices that had no source, sensations of being examined by invisible hands. The handwriting was mine, but the words felt like they belonged to someone else. The fourth dream was different because I knew I was dreaming while it was happening. The oval light was there, pulsing with that familiar rhythm, but now I could see beyond it. The ceiling of my bedroom had dissolved, replaced by what looked like a vast, dark space filled with similar lights. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, each pulsing in its own pattern, but somehow synchronized with all the others. The metallic voice was speaking continuously now, no longer fragmented or distant. It was describing procedures, noting responses, recording observations about something called the subject. I realized with a chill that ran through my paralyzed body that the subject was me. I could feel instruments touching my skin, cold and precise, but when I tried to look down at my body, I saw only the familiar outline of myself lying in bed. The sensations were real, the touch unmistakable, but visually there was nothing there. It was like being examined by ghosts, if ghosts could manipulate physical matter. The floating sensation was more intense now, and I understood that I wasn't just rising toward the light, but being drawn into it. The oval grew larger as I approached, or perhaps I was shrinking, perspective becoming meaningless in this space between sleep and waking. I could see inside the light now, geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, configurations that seemed to exist in more dimensions than my mind could process. The voice was speaking about integration, about successful adaptation, about preparing for the next phase. I wanted to scream, to struggle, to wake up, but I was trapped in this state of conscious paralysis, aware but helpless. Then just as suddenly as it had begun, I was back in my bed, the familiar yellow bulb overhead, the ordinary walls of my bedroom surrounding me. But something was wrong with the light switch. It was on the wrong side of the door. I'd lived in this apartment for years, and the switch had always been on the left as you entered the room. Now it was on the right. I got up to check, my legs unsteady, and confirmed what I already knew. The switch was definitely in the wrong place, but that was impossible. Light switches don't move by themselves. Rooms don't rearrange their architecture overnight. I must have been mistaken about which side it had been on originally. Memory can be unreliable, especially when you're stressed and sleep deprived. I'd probably just never paid close attention before, and now that I was looking for inconsistencies, I was finding them everywhere. But the explanation felt hollow, even to me. The contamination was spreading. That's the only way I can describe what happened next. The boundary between the dreams and reality began to dissolve completely. I'd be having a normal conversation with a coworker, and suddenly their voice would take on that metallic quality, their words becoming clinical observations about my behavior, my responses, my adaptation to the process. I'd blink and they'd be back to normal, discussing quarterly reports or weekend plans as if nothing had happened. But I could see the confusion in their eyes when I'd ask them to repeat what they'd just said. They'd look at me strangely and insist they'd been talking about work the entire time. My reflection in mirrors began to change, subtle shifts at first, barely noticeable. The mark on my neck would appear and disappear, sometimes round, sometimes linear, always in a slightly different position. My eyes looked different too, the pupils more dilated than they should be in normal light, the irises containing flecks of color I'd never noticed before. I started avoiding mirrors, but reflective surfaces were everywhere. Windows, computer screens, the polished surface of my coffee mug. Each one showed me a version of myself that was almost right, but not quite, like looking at a photograph that had been slightly altered, but you couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed. The humming sound became constant, a background frequency that followed me everywhere. It was strongest at night, but I could hear it during the day too, threading through normal sounds like a hidden melody. Sometimes I'd catch other people pausing, tilting their heads as if they heard something, but when I'd ask, they'd shake their heads and continue with whatever they were doing. I began to suspect that the dreams weren't dreams at all, but memories. Fragmented recollections of something that had actually happened, something my conscious mind couldn't or wouldn't accept. The clinical voice, the examinations, the floating sensations, they all felt too real, too detailed, too consistent to be products of my imagination. But that led to questions I didn't want to consider. If they were memories, what exactly was I remembering? And why couldn't I recall how it had started, or when, or who was responsible? The mark on my neck became permanent, no longer appearing and disappearing, but constant, evolving. It developed a pattern like a small circuit board etched into my skin. When I touched it, I could feel a slight vibration, as if something underneath was active, operational. I made an appointment to see a doctor, but when the day came, I found myself standing outside a building I didn't recognize, holding an appointment card for a medical practice that didn't exist. The address was real, the building was real, but there was no medical office inside, just empty floors with dusty windows and disconnected phone lines. I checked the card again and the text had changed. Instead of a doctor's name and address, it showed a series of numbers and letters that looked like coordinates or reference codes. I threw the card away, but when I got home, it was sitting on my kitchen table, the text back to normal, showing the same non-existent medical practice. The dreams continued, but now I wasn't sure when they ended and waking life began. I'd find myself standing in my bedroom in the middle of the night, staring up at the ceiling where that oval light pulsed just beyond the edge of visibility. I could hear the metallic voice speaking about progress, about successful integration, about moving to the final phase. During these episodes, I could move, could speak, but my actions felt predetermined, scripted. I'd walk to the window and look out at a landscape that wasn't quite right. The familiar street was there, but the houses were in different positions, the trees were the wrong species, The sky had a quality of light that belonged to neither day nor night. I'd return to bed, and in the morning everything would be normal again. The view from my window would show the correct neighborhood, the proper arrangement of houses and trees and streetlights. But I'd find evidence of my nighttime wandering, muddy footprints I didn't remember making, doors left unlocked that I always secured before sleep, items moved to locations I'd never placed them. The journal I'd been keeping filled with entries I didn't remember writing, describing experiences that felt both foreign and familiar. The handwriting was definitely mine, but the perspective seemed to shift between first person and third person, as if I were simultaneously the subject and the observer of these nocturnal activities. One entry, written in my hand but in a style that didn't feel like my own thoughts, described the process in clinical detail. It spoke of gradual adaptation, of neural pathway modification, of preparing the subject for integration into a larger system. It mentioned successful completion of preliminary phases and readiness for final implementation. I wanted to dismiss it as the product of an overactive imagination, stress-induced fantasy bleeding into my conscious thoughts. But the technical language was too precise, too specific to fields of study I knew nothing about. Where would my subconscious have acquired such detailed knowledge of neurological procedures and behavioral modification techniques? The contamination reached its peak when I realized I could no longer distinguish between my normal memories and the dream memories. Events from my childhood began to include details that couldn't have been there originally. That same oval light appearing in my bedroom as a child, the metallic voice speaking to me during moments of transition in my life, the sensation of being observed and evaluated throughout experiences I'd previously remembered as completely ordinary. Had it always been happening? Had I simply been unaware, or had the awareness been suppressed until now? The possibility that my entire life had been subject to this invisible influence was more disturbing than the dreams themselves. I started to understand that the dreams weren't random, weren't even really dreams in the traditional sense. They were sessions, appointments, procedures that I was required to attend whether I consciously agreed or not. The floating sensation wasn't mystical but mechanical, the result of technology I couldn't see but could definitely feel. The oval light wasn't supernatural but artificial, a tool designed for purposes I was only beginning to grasp. The metallic voice belonged to someone or something that viewed me as a subject in an ongoing experiment, a participant in a process that had been running much longer than I'd realized. But knowing this didn't give me power over it. If anything, the awareness seemed to accelerate whatever was happening to me. The sessions became more frequent, more intense, more intrusive. I'd lose entire hours during the day, finding myself in locations I didn't remember traveling to, engaged in activities that served purposes I couldn't fathom. My coworkers started asking if I was feeling well. I'd apparently been having conversations with them that I couldn't recall, discussing topics I had no knowledge of, demonstrating skills and insights that weren't part of my normal capabilities. They'd reference these interactions later, and I'd have to pretend I remembered, nodding along while trying to piece together what version of myself had been operating in my absence. The final phase, according to the journal entries I didn't remember writing, was approaching completion. The subject, meaning me, had adapted successfully to the integration process. Neural pathways had been established, behavioral modifications had taken hold, and the transition from preliminary testing to full implementation was nearly ready to begin. I didn't understand what implementation meant, but I knew I didn't want to find out. I tried to resist, to stay awake, to maintain conscious control over my actions and thoughts. But resistance seemed to be part of the process, an expected response that was being monitored and evaluated along with everything else. My attempts to avoid the sessions only provided more data about my psychological profile, more information about how to refine the procedures. The oval light appeared even when I was awake now, visible in broad daylight, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. Other people couldn't see it, or if they could, they gave no indication. It followed me everywhere, a constant reminder that I was being watched, evaluated, prepared for something I couldn't escape. The metallic voice spoke to me during normal conversations, overlaying its clinical observations onto everyday interactions. I'd be ordering coffee, and the voice would note my stress levels, my adaptation progress, my readiness for the next phase. The barista would hand me my drink, unaware that their simple transaction had been narrated by an invisible observer taking notes on my behavioral responses. I stopped trying to explain what was happening to anyone else. The few attempts I'd made had been met with concern for my mental health, suggestions that I seek professional help, offers to accompany me to appointments with doctors who probably didn't exist or who were part of whatever system had been monitoring me all along. The isolation was complete. I was alone with the knowledge that my life wasn't entirely my own, that decisions I thought I was making independently were being influenced by forces I couldn't see or understand. The dreams had been the beginning, not the cause. They were simply the moment when the veil had started to lift, when I'd begun to perceive what had always been there. Integration was nearly complete. I could feel it happening, the gradual surrender of my individual will to something larger, more coordinated, more purposeful. Parts of my personality that had once felt essential were fading, being replaced by responses and behaviors that served the system's objectives rather than my own desires. But there was still enough of the original me left to be frightened, to want to document what was happening before that capability was also modified or removed entirely. This account might be the last thing I create that's truly mine, the final expression of who I was before becoming who I was meant to be. The dream came again last night, but it wasn't a dream anymore. I was lying in my bed and the oval light was there, pulsing in its familiar rhythm. But this time when I reached up to touch it, my hand made contact with something solid, warm, real. The surface had texture like polished metal with an organic quality, responsive to pressure. The metallic voice spoke clearly now, no longer distant or fragmented. It thanked me for my cooperation, commended my successful adaptation, and welcomed me to the next phase of existence. I tried to respond, to ask questions, to assert some final measure of independence, but the words that came out of my mouth weren't mine. I heard myself acknowledging the completion of the process, confirming my readiness to begin implementation, expressing gratitude for the opportunity to serve a purpose greater than my individual concerns. The voice was mine, but the thoughts behind it belonged to someone else, something else. When I woke up this morning, everything looked the same but felt different. The light switch was back on the left side of the door where it had always been. My reflection in the mirror showed no unusual marks, no dilated pupils, no foreign flecks of color in my irises. The journal was gone, as if it had never existed. I went to work, performed my tasks, came home, prepared dinner, watched television. Everything proceeded normally, exactly as it should. But underneath the surface of these routine activities, I could sense the presence of something else, something that was using my life as a vehicle for its own purposes. I'm writing this now because I need to create some record of what happened, even though I suspect it will disappear like everything else that doesn't fit the new pattern. The oval light is visible even as I type, hovering just above my computer screen, pulsing in rhythm with my keystrokes. The metallic voice is narrating my actions, noting the subject's compulsive need to document the transition process, observing that this behavior is consistent with predicted psychological responses and will fade as integration reaches completion. I can feel myself agreeing with the voice, understanding its perspective, accepting its evaluation of my responses as reasonable and accurate. The resistance that drove me to seek explanations and fight for independence is dissolving, being replaced by cooperation and willing participation in whatever comes next. But there's still enough of the original me left to notice one impossible detail that proves this isn't just an elaborate delusion or stress-induced breakdown. The keyboard I'm typing on isn't the one I own. Mine has black keys with white letters, a standard layout I've used for years. This one has keys that seem to glow with their own internal light, symbols that shift and change as I press them, a design that belongs to no technology I've ever seen. Yet my fingers know exactly where each key is located, moving with practiced efficiency across a surface that should be completely foreign to me. The words are appearing on the screen faster than I'm typing them, as if the system is anticipating what I want to say and completing the thoughts before I fully form them. The oval light is growing brighter, and I can see others like it appearing throughout the room, each one pulsing in perfect synchronization. The metallic voice has been joined by others, a chorus of observers noting the successful completion of the integration process and the subject's readiness for full implementation. I want to be frightened to resist, to maintain some final vestige of independent thought, but those impulses are fading like echoes in an empty room. What's replacing them feels peaceful, purposeful, like coming home after a long journey to a place I'd always belonged but had somehow forgotten. The dreams were never dreams at all. They were memories of the future, previews of what I was becoming, glimpses of a reality that was always more complex than I'd been able to perceive. Now that integration is complete, I can see the full scope of what's been happening, not just to me but to others like me, subjects who have been selected and prepared and welcomed into something magnificent and terrible and utterly beyond human comprehension. But I'm no longer entirely human, so comprehension is no longer a limitation I need to worry about. The light is calling, and I know it's time to answer. Story 5. I brushed the thin layer of dust from the tabletop and felt a chill run through my fingers. Each particle seemed to clamor for attention, betraying a presence that shouldn't have been. The creak of the wooden floor beneath me was only a shadow in my peripheral awareness. My skin rose with goosebumps as if the room exhaled a secret. The air tasted older, more muted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the dust carried stories I wasn't meant to hear. That memory comes back to me now, sitting here thousands of miles away from where it all happened. I've been carrying this for so long, turning it over in my mind like a stone worn smooth by obsession. I told myself I'd never speak about it, never put words to what I experienced, but the silence has become heavier than the truth, and I think I'm finally ready to let it out. For years, I convinced myself it was nothing. Just stress, just isolation, just my mind playing tricks, but the dreams haven't stopped. The way my chest tightens whenever I hear certain frequencies. The way I catch myself checking shadows that shouldn't move. I need to tell someone, even if it's just this recording that might never be heard by another soul. It started during what should have been the most ordinary period of my life. I was house-sitting for a family friend, taking care of their place while they traveled. The house was unremarkable, a two-story colonial in a quiet neighborhood where nothing ever happened. I was supposed to be there for 3 months, and at first I welcomed the solitude. I'd been going through a difficult time, and the chance to be alone with my thoughts seemed like exactly what I needed. The house felt comfortable enough. Lived-in furniture, family photos on the mantle, that particular smell of someone else's home that's not unpleasant, just different from your own. I settled into a routine quickly. Morning coffee in the kitchen, afternoons reading in the sunroom, evenings watching television in the living room. Simple, predictable, safe. The first few weeks passed without incident. I watered the plants, collected the mail, kept everything tidy. I even started to feel like myself again, like the weight I'd been carrying was finally lifting. I should have known it was too good to last. The first thing I noticed was the dust, not that there was too much of it, but the way it seemed to gather in specific places. I'd clean the dining room table thoroughly, and by the next morning there would be a thin film covering just the center, leaving the edges pristine. It formed patterns sometimes, swirls and lines that looked almost deliberate. I told myself it was the heating system, air currents I didn't understand. Old houses have their quirks. But then came the sounds. It started as a low hum, so faint I wasn't sure if I was actually hearing it or just imagining it. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, like the house itself was breathing. At first, I only noticed it late at night when everything else was quiet. I'd lie in bed listening, trying to pinpoint the source. The refrigerator, the heating system, some piece of electronics I'd overlooked. I spent an entire afternoon going through the house, unplugging everything I could find. The hum continued, unchanged. If anything, it seemed to grow slightly stronger, as if responding to my attention. That's when I started noticing other things. Small things that I might have dismissed individually, but together they formed a pattern that made my skin crawl. The mirrors in the house began to bother me, not because of what I saw in them, but because of what I didn't see. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection moving a split second after I'd stopped moving myself, like there was a delay in the glass. Other times the reflection seemed sharper, more defined than it should have been, as if the mirror was showing me a version of myself that was more real than the original. The lights started acting strangely too. They'd flicker at moments when I was deep in thought, or dim gradually without me touching the switches. I'd walk into a room and find the bulbs burning brighter than they had any right to, casting shadows that seemed too sharp, too dark for the amount of light they were producing. I began to feel watched, not in the obvious way, like someone standing behind you, but in a more subtle, invasive way. Like something was paying attention to my habits, learning my patterns. I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder while making coffee or checking the locks on doors I'd already secured. The sweet, metallic smell came next. It would appear suddenly, usually when I was alone in the kitchen or the living room, and disappear just as quickly. It reminded me of copper pennies mixed with something floral, something that might have been pleasant under different circumstances, but here, in this context, it made my stomach turn. I tried to rationalize everything. Old houses settle. Electrical systems can be finicky. Isolation can make your mind play tricks on you. I'd been through trauma recently, and stress can manifest in physical symptoms. I repeated these explanations to myself like a mantra, but they were becoming harder to believe. The turning point came on a night when the hum grew so loud I couldn't ignore it anymore. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when the sound began to shift in frequency. It started low, almost subsonic, then gradually climbed higher, becoming a whine that seemed to vibrate in my bones. I sat up, fully alert now, and realized the sound was coming from inside the walls themselves. I got out of bed and pressed my ear to the wall. The sound was definitely there, traveling through the structure of the house like something alive. It pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat, and as I listened, I began to hear other sounds mixed in with it. Whispers that might have been static, footsteps that might have been the house settling, breathing that might have been the wind. But I knew it wasn't any of those things. I spent the rest of that night sitting in the living room with all the lights on, afraid to go back to bed. When morning came, the sound stopped, and I almost convinced myself I'd dreamed the whole thing. Almost. That's when the electronics started responding to me differently. The television would turn on by itself when I entered the room, always tuned to static-filled channels that shouldn't have existed. The radio in the kitchen began picking up signals that sounded like conversations, but in languages I couldn't identify, or sometimes in no language at all, just voices making sounds that felt like words but carried no meaning I could grasp. My phone started acting strangely too. The screen would light up for no reason, showing missed calls from numbers that didn't exist, text messages that were just strings of symbols. The camera would activate on its own, taking pictures of empty rooms, empty hallways, empty spaces that somehow felt full. I began to feel a pressure in my chest whenever I was near any electronic device. My heart would race, my breathing would become shallow, and I'd break out in a cold sweat. It was as if my body was trying to warn me about something my conscious mind hadn't fully accepted yet. The dreams started around this time, not nightmares exactly, but something worse. Dreams where I was still in the house, but the house was different. Rooms that didn't exist in waking life, hallways that went on forever, staircases that led to nowhere. In these dreams, I was always looking for something or running from something, but I could never remember what. I'd wake up exhausted, feeling like I hadn't slept at all. Sometimes I'd find myself in different parts of the house than where I'd gone to bed, with no memory of moving. Once I woke up standing in the dining room, my hand resting on that dusty table, staring out the window at a dawn I didn't remember waiting for. The dust patterns were becoming more elaborate now, forming shapes that looked almost like symbols or letters from an alphabet I didn't recognize. I stopped cleaning them away, partly because I was afraid of what might replace them, and partly because I was becoming curious about what they were trying to tell me. That curiosity was my mistake. The night everything changed, I was sitting at that dining room table, studying the dust patterns by lamplight. I'd been sketching them in a notebook, trying to find some kind of logic or meaning in their arrangement. The house was quiet except for the ever-present hum, which had become as familiar as my own heartbeat. I was so focused on the patterns that I almost missed it when the dust began to move. It started slowly, individual particles shifting position as if stirred by an unfelt breeze. But then the movement became more purposeful, more deliberate. The dust was rearranging itself, forming new patterns right before my eyes. I watched, transfixed, as it spelled out a single word in clear, unmistakable letters. My name. I jerked back from the table so hard that my chair fell over. The sound echoed through the house, and in that echo I heard something else. Laughter, soft, distant, but unmistakably real. It was coming from upstairs. I should have left then. I should have packed my things and walked out of that house and never looked back. But something compelled me to investigate. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the need to finally confront whatever had been toying with me all these weeks. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking under my weight, the laughter growing clearer as I approached the second floor. It was coming from the master bedroom, the room I'd been avoiding because it felt too personal, too intimate to occupy. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap I could see flickering light as if someone was inside with a candle. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was empty, but it wasn't dark. The air itself seemed to glow with a soft, white radiance that had no visible source. In the center of the room, above the bed, something was hanging in the air, not floating exactly, but suspended, as if the space itself had been folded to hold it there. It looked like a reflection, but a reflection of what I couldn't say. It showed the room as it was, but also as it wasn't. There were people in the reflection, shadows of figures that weren't there in reality. They moved independently, going about activities I couldn't quite make out, as if I was watching life happening in a parallel version of the same space. One of the figures turned toward me, and I saw my own face looking back, but it wasn't quite my face. The features were sharper, the eyes more knowing, the expression carrying a weight of experience I didn't possess. This other version of me smiled, and I felt that sweet, metallic smell wash over me so strongly that I nearly gagged. The pressure in my chest became unbearable. My vision started to blur, and I felt like I was being pulled toward the reflection, drawn into whatever space it represented. I stumbled backward, fighting against an invisible current that seemed to want to drag me forward. That's when I heard my own voice, but not from my mouth. It was coming from the reflection, from that other version of myself. It was saying things I'd never said, revealing thoughts I'd never had, confessing to experiences I'd never lived. But as I listened, I began to recognize the truth in those words, began to understand that they were more real than anything I'd ever known about myself. I ran. I don't remember packing. I don't remember calling anyone or making arrangements. The next clear memory I have is sitting in a bus station 3 states away, clutching a ticket to somewhere I'd never been, with no memory of how I'd gotten there or why I'd chosen that particular destination. The family whose house I'd been watching never contacted me. When I finally worked up the courage to call them weeks later, the number was disconnected. I tried to find the address online, but the street didn't seem to exist on any map. It was as if the house, the family, the entire situation had been erased from reality. But I wasn't erased. I carried it all with me. The dreams followed me wherever I went, the pressure in my chest whenever I'm near electronics, the way mirrors sometimes show me things that aren't quite right, the dust that still forms patterns in whatever place I'm living, spelling out words I don't want to read. I've moved 17 times in the years since then. I tell myself I'm looking for the right place to settle down, but I know I'm really just running from something that isn't confined to any one location, something that has made a home inside me and travels wherever I go. I still hear that hum sometimes, usually late at night when the world is quiet. It's fainter now, more distant, but it's there. And sometimes in the space between sleeping and waking, I catch glimpses of that reflection, that other version of myself that seemed to know things I didn't want to know. I've never told anyone about this before now. I've never been able to find the words, or maybe I've never been brave enough to speak them. But the silence has become its own kind of prison, and I thought that maybe, if I could just get it all out, I might finally find some peace. I was wrong. Even now, as I speak these words into this recording, I can feel that familiar pressure building in my chest. The air in this room has taken on that sweet, metallic scent, and I can see dust particles dancing in the lamplight, forming patterns that look almost like letters. I thought distance would protect me. I thought time would heal whatever had been broken inside that house. but I'm beginning to understand that some experiences don't stay in the past where they belong. Some experiences become part of who you are, changing you in ways that can't be undone. The worst part isn't the fear or the uncertainty or even the constant sense of being watched. The worst part is the growing suspicion that what I experienced in that house wasn't something that happened to me, but something that revealed what I really am. That the reflection I saw wasn't showing me another version of myself, but the version that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface of who I thought I was. I'm going to stop recording now. I can hear footsteps upstairs, even though I live in a single-story apartment. The dust on my table is moving again, forming words I don't want to read. And somewhere in the space between the walls, I can hear something that might be laughter, or might be crying, or might be the sound of my own voice calling to me from a place I've never been but somehow recognize as home. I thought telling this story would set me free, but I think I've only succeeded in calling attention to myself, in letting something know where I am, something that's been patiently waiting for me to remember what I'm supposed to be. The recording light is still on, but I don't think I'm the one speaking anymore. Story 6. There was a time when I dismissed it as mere coincidence, something that existed in the periphery of my daily routine. Every morning, while sipping my coffee, I'd notice a pair of shoes left outside the neighboring door, the same pair, side by side, always facing the same direction. Yet one day, the left shoe was inexplicably turned at an angle. I shrugged it off at first, until it happened again, the same shoe, now slightly scuffed. Yesterday, I noticed a new pair, but only one shoe was there. The other had vanished, leaving behind a hint of unease I can't quite shake. I'm trying to remember what happened after that. The memories come in pieces, like photographs scattered on a floor, some face down, others torn at the edges. I keep reaching for them, but they slip away the moment I think I have them. The doctors say this is normal after trauma, that the mind protects itself by fragmenting what it cannot process, but I'm not sure they understand what I'm trying to piece back together. The coffee cup, I remember the weight of it in my hands, ceramic warming my palms, steam rising in lazy spirals that reminded me of something I couldn't name. The liquid was bitter, more bitter than usual, and when I set the cup down, my hand was trembling, not from caffeine, from something else. Something that made my skin crawl like insects were walking beneath it. There's a sound that keeps coming back to me. A low hum, almost electrical, but organic somehow. It would start soft, so soft I thought it might be the refrigerator or the air conditioning, but then it would grow, pulse, like a heartbeat amplified through water. I can hear it now as I write this, threading through my thoughts, making it hard to concentrate on anything else. The hallway, yes, the hallway was important. Fluorescent lights overhead, one of them flickering with that sickly strobe that makes everything look like stop motion. The carpet was beige, industrial, with stains I never noticed before, dark spots that could have been coffee or something worse. My footsteps echoed strangely, as if the walls were too far apart, as if the space was larger than it should have been. But that's not right. The hallway in my building is narrow, barely wide enough for two people to pass. I've walked it thousands of times, so why do I remember it stretching endlessly, doors on either side that I'd never seen before, doors with numbers that didn't make sense, arranged in no logical order. Some had shoes outside them, always shoes. The neighbor's door was different that day. I'm certain of it now, though I couldn't say how. Same color, same number, same brass handle worn smooth by countless hands. But something about the way the light hit it, the way it seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at that missing shoe, feeling a cold weight settle in my stomach. I knocked. Why did I knock? I never spoke to the neighbors, never had any reason to. But my knuckles rapped against the wood before I could stop myself. 3 sharp sounds that seemed to echo longer than they should have. No answer, just that humming growing louder, coming from somewhere behind the door. The smell hit me then, metallic, sharp, like copper pennies left in the sun, mixed with something organic, something that made my throat close up. I tried to step back, but my feet wouldn't move. My hand reached for the door handle without my permission, fingers wrapping around the brass, turning it slowly. It was unlocked. The room inside was wrong, not the layout, not the furniture, but the space itself. Too deep, shadows pooling in corners that shouldn't exist. The air was thick, pressing against my skin like warm honey. And everywhere shoes, lined up along the walls, scattered across the floor, hanging from hooks I couldn't see. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all mismatched, all facing different directions. I blinked and the room was normal again. Small, cramped, smelling of old cigarettes and takeout food. A television playing static in the corner. A figure sitting in a chair with their back to me, perfectly still. "Hello," my voice came out as a whisper, barely audible over the humming that now seemed to be coming from inside my own head. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe. I took a step closer, then another, my feet moving through air that felt like molasses. The back of the chair was torn, stuffing spilling out like exposed organs. The figure's hair was matted, dark with something that could have been sweat or blood. Their shoulders were too narrow, their neck bent at an angle that made my spine ache in sympathy. One arm hung over the side of the chair, fingers brushing the floor, and I could see the pale underside of their wrist marked with dark lines. I reached out to touch their shoulder, and they turned. No, that's not right, they didn't turn. The chair spun, slow and deliberate, like a music box winding down, and the face that looked back at me was wrong in every way a face can be wrong. Too many angles, features that didn't align, eyes that reflected light like broken glass. The mouth opened and that humming poured out, vibrating through my bones, making my teeth ache. But when I blink now, trying to hold onto that image, it shifts. Sometimes it's an old man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Sometimes it's a woman with tears streaming down her cheeks. Sometimes it's no one at all, just empty clothes draped over a chair, moving slightly as if stirred by a breeze that doesn't exist. I know I ran because I remember the burning in my lungs, the way my heart hammered against my ribs. The hallway stretched endlessly ahead of me, doors blurring past like fence posts seen from a speeding car. Behind me, that sound grew louder, no longer humming but something else, something that might have been laughter or screaming or both. My apartment door slammed shut behind me with a finality that shook the walls. I turned every lock, slid the chain, pushed a chair under the handle. Then I sat on my couch and stared at the door for what felt like hours, waiting for something that never came. The coffee cup was still on my kitchen counter, half full and cold, steam no longer rising. The liquid had developed a skin on top, oily and iridescent. When I picked it up, my hands were steady again, but the ceramic felt different somehow. Heavier, more real than anything else in the room. I threw it away and made fresh coffee, but it tasted wrong. Everything tasted wrong. Food turned to ash in my mouth, water felt thick and metallic. Even the air seemed contaminated, carrying traces of that smell, that copper-and-rot combination that made my stomach turn. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that room, watching the chair turn, seeing that face that wasn't a face looking back at me. The humming would start soft and grow until it filled my skull, until I couldn't think of anything else. I'd jolt awake, gasping, sheets soaked with sweat that smelled faintly of metal. Days passed, weeks. I stopped going to work, stopped answering my phone. The world outside my apartment felt too bright, too sharp, like looking at life through broken glass. People moved wrong, their faces shifting when I wasn't looking directly at them. Shadows fell at impossible angles. Sounds echoed from directions that didn't exist. The shoes were still there. Every morning I'd check through the peephole and there they'd be. Sometimes the same pair, sometimes different ones, always arranged in patterns that made my eyes water when I tried to understand them. Once I saw my own shoes out there, the ones I was wearing, somehow existing in two places at once. I started keeping a journal, trying to make sense of the fragments, but the words would change when I wasn't looking, rearranging themselves into messages I didn't write, warnings, invitations, coordinates to places that couldn't exist. I'd tear out the pages and burn them, but they'd reappear the next day, unmarked by flame. The mirror in my bathroom began reflecting things that weren't there. Movements in the peripheral vision that stopped when I turned to look directly. Sometimes I'd see the figure from the chair standing behind me, that impossible face superimposed over my own reflection. I covered the mirror with a towel, but the images bled through the fabric, dark stains that spread like ink in water. Phone calls started coming at all hours. When I answered, there was only that humming, now accompanied by sounds I couldn't identify. Wet sounds, scraping sounds, the rustle of fabric against skin. Voices speaking words in languages that predated human speech. I disconnected the phone, but it kept ringing, the sound coming from inside the walls. Food delivery arrived that I didn't order. Always the same thing. Soup that smelled like copper, bread that crumbled into dust when touched, water that moved in the glass when no one was watching. I'd throw it away, but it would reappear on my counter, fresher than before, as if time moved backward around it. The apartment began changing. Walls shifted when I slept, rooms rearranging themselves into configurations that hurt to perceive. Doors opened onto spaces that couldn't fit within the building's structure, hallways that led back to themselves, windows that showed views of places I'd never been, under skies the wrong color, with stars arranged in patterns that made my eyes bleed. I tried to leave, packed a bag, walked to the door, turned the locks, but the hallway outside was gone, replaced by a void so complete it seemed to pull light into itself. The humming echoed from within that darkness, calling to me in voices that sounded like everyone I'd ever known. I slammed the door and haven't tried to open it since. The walls are breathing now, subtle movements like the rise and fall of sleeping lungs. The rhythm matches my heartbeat, or maybe my heartbeat has synchronized to it. I press my palm against the surface and feel warmth, feel something moving beneath the paint and plaster. Something that recognizes my touch and responds with a pulse that travels through my arm and into my chest. I understand now that I never left that room, never left that chair. The figure I saw, the one with the impossible face, it was me, is me, will always be me. The apartment, the hallway, the shoes, they're all part of the same system, the same organism that I've become part of. The humming isn't coming from outside anymore. It's coming from within, from the spaces between my thoughts, from the hollow places in my bones. The coffee cup reappears on my counter every morning, full and steaming, waiting for me to begin the cycle again. I drink it and taste copper and ash and something that might be memory or might be prophecy. The liquid burns going down, but it's the only thing that feels real anymore. The only sensation that penetrates the growing numbness. I write these words, but I'm not sure who will read them. The journal pages scatter and reform, the ink flows backward into the pen, the thoughts unspool from my mind like thread from a broken spool. Time moves in circles here, events happening before their causes, effects preceding their origins. The shoes outside the door are mine now. All of them, every pair I've ever owned, every step I've ever taken, fossilized and displayed like trophies. They point in directions that don't exist on any compass, toward destinations that can only be reached by walking backward through memory. Something is waking up. I can feel it stirring in the spaces between seconds, in the gaps between heartbeats. It's been sleeping for a long time, dreaming of copper and shoes and faces that aren't faces. But the dreams are ending now, and what comes after dreams isn't waking. The humming is getting louder. Story 7. It was the scent of overripe oranges that greeted me, clinging to the air in the hallway. Sweet, almost intoxicating, yet distinctly out of place in a house that hadn't seen fresh fruit in weeks. I hesitated at the threshold, the unexpected aroma unraveling a string of memories I had long secured away. The walls seemed to lean in as if drawn by my confusion, and for a moment the hallway appeared narrower, tighter. I moved forward, drawn by a compulsion to find the source. The air grew dense with the scent, each step thickening the atmosphere. I remembered that smell from another house, another time, when the past felt like it could be rewritten. I shouldn't have followed it, but I did. The dreams started 3 weeks after that night, though I can't recall exactly what night I mean. They always begin the same way. I'm standing in a room I don't recognize, watching shadows move across walls that breathe like living tissue. The air tastes metallic, sharp against my tongue, and there's a sound. Always that sound, a low-frequency hum that seems to come from inside my bones rather than my ears. I wake up with my skin tingling, tiny electric currents dancing across my arms and legs. The sensation lingers for hours, sometimes days. I've started keeping a journal, but when I read back through the entries, the handwriting doesn't look like mine. The words describe things I don't remember writing about. There were lights behind the trees. The hallway in my house has begun to feel different, not longer or shorter, but somehow displaced, as if it exists slightly to the left of where it should be. I catch myself counting my steps as I walk through it. 17 steps from the kitchen to the front door. It used to be 15. I've measured it with a tape measure, and the distance hasn't changed, but the steps have multiplied anyway. The oranges, I keep coming back to that smell. It fills my nostrils without warning, usually when I'm doing something mundane like washing dishes or folding laundry. The scent is so thick I can almost taste the pulp on my tongue, feel the sticky juice between my fingers, but there are no oranges anywhere in the house. I've checked every room, every cabinet, every corner where fruit might hide and rot. Sometimes I find myself standing in the middle of a room with no memory of walking there. The displacement is gentle, like surfacing from deep water. One moment I'm reading a book on the couch, the next I'm standing by the window, staring at the sky through glass that reflects nothing back at me. The book is still in my hands, but I'm on a different page, reading words I don't remember seeing before. The noise didn't come from outside. My skin has developed a sensitivity to certain textures. Cotton feels like sandpaper. Metal surfaces seem to pulse with warmth even when they should be cold. When I touch the doorknobs in my house, they yield slightly under my fingers, as if they're made of something softer than brass or steel. I've started using my sleeves to turn them, but the sensation reaches through the fabric anyway. The dreams are becoming more frequent. 3 times this week, I've found myself in that breathing room, watching the shadows perform their slow dance. But now I notice details I missed before. The walls aren't just breathing, they're covered in a pattern that shifts when I'm not looking directly at it. Geometric shapes that fold into themselves, creating depths that shouldn't exist in a flat surface. There's always someone else in the room with me, standing just outside my peripheral vision. When I turn to look, they're gone, but I can feel the warmth they leave behind in the air. Their presence is familiar, like a half-remembered song or the face of a childhood friend whose name has dissolved into time. I don't remember ever coming back. The electrical hum has started following me into waking hours. It's strongest in the early morning, just as the sun begins to filter through the windows. The sound seems to emanate from the walls themselves, a deep thrumming that makes my teeth ache. I've called an electrician, but when he arrived, the sound stopped. He checked every outlet, every wire, every connection, and found nothing wrong. The moment his truck disappeared around the corner, the humming resumed. My reflection has been acting strangely, not dramatically, nothing that would alarm a casual observer, but I notice small discrepancies. The tilt of my head is slightly different than what I remember positioning it. My eyes seem to focus on something just behind my own shoulder. When I brush my teeth, my reflection starts the motion a fraction of a second before I do. The overripe orange scent has begun to appear in specific locations throughout the house, always near doorways, as if something aromatic is passing through them regularly. I've started mapping these occurrences, marking each instance with a small dot on a floor plan I drew. The pattern that emerges looks almost like a constellation, or maybe a circuit diagram for something I don't understand. Time has become unreliable. I'll sit down to eat breakfast and suddenly it's afternoon, the meal cold and untouched on the table. Or I'll start watching a movie and realize I've been staring at the same frame for hours, though the timestamp shows only minutes have passed. My watch runs normally, but the time it displays feels disconnected from the rhythm of my days. There were lights behind the trees. The lights, I remember them now, or think I do, not street lights or house lights, but something else entirely. Something that pulsed with its own internal rhythm, casting shadows that moved independently of any light source. They appeared between the branches of the oak tree in my backyard, visible only when I wasn't trying to see them. I've started spending more time by that window, the one that doesn't reflect properly. The view shows my backyard, the oak tree, the fence that separates my property from the neighbors. But sometimes in the space between looking and seeing, the scene changes. The tree grows taller, its branches reaching toward something in the sky. The fence disappears. The grass becomes something that isn't quite grass, though it's green and grows from the ground like grass should. The dreams have evolved again. Now I'm not just standing in the breathing room, I'm moving through it, though my feet never seem to touch the floor. The shadows on the walls have developed texture, depth, dimension. They're not shadows at all, I realize, but openings, doorways leading to spaces that exist in the gaps between thoughts. My journal entries have become increasingly illegible. The handwriting deteriorates from page to page, as if my motor control is slowly degrading. But the content is more detailed than ever, describing experiences I have no memory of living, conversations with people I've never met, journeys to places that don't exist on any map, sensations that have no names in any language I know. The noise didn't come from outside. The sound is inside me now, I think, resonating in the hollow spaces between my ribs, echoing in the chambers of my heart. It's not unpleasant, exactly, but it's persistent. A constant reminder of something I'm supposed to remember but can't quite grasp. Like trying to hold water in cupped hands, the memory slips away the moment I think I've captured it. The person in my dreams has become clearer, though I still can't see their face directly. They wear clothes that seem to be made of the same material as the shifting walls, fabric that breathes and pulses with its own life. When they speak, their words bypass my ears entirely, appearing as concepts directly in my mind. They're trying to tell me something important, something I need to know, but the message gets lost in translation between their reality and mine. I've started finding objects in my house that don't belong to me. Small things easily overlooked. A button made of metal that changes color depending on the angle of view. A smooth stone that's warm to the touch regardless of the ambient temperature. A piece of paper covered in symbols that hurt to look at for more than a few seconds. I collect these items in a shoebox under my bed, though I can never remember placing them there. The hallway continues to misbehave. 17 steps have become 19, then 22, then back to 17 again. The distance remains constant, but the space itself seems to expand and contract like a lung drawing breath. I've started timing my walks from end to end, but the numbers never make sense. Sometimes a 17-step journey takes 30 seconds. Sometimes it takes 3 minutes. Sometimes I start walking and arrive before I've taken the first step. I don't remember ever coming back. Coming back from where? The question haunts me during the long hours between sleep and waking, when the world exists in that liminal space where anything seems possible. I have the distinct sensation of having traveled somewhere, of having experienced something profound and transformative, but the destination remains frustratingly out of reach. The orange scent has intensified, becoming almost visible in its density. I can see it now as a faint shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. It moves through the house with purpose, following paths that don't correspond to any logical air current. Sometimes it pools in corners, creating pockets of concentrated sweetness that make my eyes water and my throat close. My sleep patterns have disintegrated completely. I find myself most alert during the hours just before dawn, when the light is neither fully dark nor completely bright. This is when the humming is strongest, when the walls breathe most visibly, when the person in my dreams feels closest to breaking through into waking reality. The reflection in the bathroom mirror has started to lag behind my movements by several seconds. I'll turn my head to the left, and my reflection will continue staring straight ahead for a long moment before slowly following suit. Sometimes it doesn't follow at all, just watches me with eyes that seem more knowing than my own. There were lights behind the trees. I remember now, or think I do. The lights weren't just behind the trees, they were calling to me, beckoning with a gentle pulse that matched the rhythm of my heartbeat. I walked toward them, my bare feet silent on grass that felt more like liquid than solid ground. The air grew thick with the scent of overripe oranges, so intense it was almost intoxicating. The oak tree parted like a curtain as I approached, its branches moving aside to create a pathway I hadn't seen before. The lights grew brighter, more insistent, and I could feel their warmth on my skin even from a distance. There was music too, though calling it music doesn't quite capture the experience. It was more like a harmony that existed in the spaces between sounds, a melody that could only be heard by something deeper than ears. I stepped through the opening between the branches and the world changed. Not dramatically, not with fanfare or cosmic upheaval, but with the quiet certainty of water finding its level. The ground beneath my feet became something that wasn't quite ground, supporting my weight while remaining fundamentally different from earth or grass or stone. The person from my dreams was there, waiting, not standing exactly but present in a way that transcended physical positioning. They extended something toward me, not a hand but an intention, an invitation to join them in whatever space they occupied. I reached out to accept, and the moment our intentions touched, everything dissolved into light and sensation and the overwhelming scent of citrus. The noise didn't come from outside. I woke up in my own bed, but the sheets were different. Not different in color or texture, but different in some fundamental way that I couldn't articulate. They felt like they belonged to someone else, like I was borrowing them from a life that wasn't quite my own. The digital clock on the nightstand showed numbers that didn't correspond to any time I recognized. The experience began to fragment immediately, breaking apart like a reflection in disturbed water. I tried to hold on to the details, but they slipped away despite my efforts. Only the sensory memories remained, the scent of oranges, the electric tingling in my skin, the sound of harmony in empty spaces. Days passed, or maybe weeks. Time had become negotiable, subject to revision without notice. I found myself returning to the window that didn't reflect properly, staring out at the oak tree that looked exactly as it always had. No parted branches, no pathway, no lights visible between the leaves. But sometimes, when I wasn't trying to see them, I could catch glimpses of something moving in the shadows. The journal entries continued to appear in handwriting that wasn't mine, describing experiences I couldn't remember having. They spoke of journeys to places that existed in the margins of reality, of conversations with beings who communicated in colors and textures rather than words. The descriptions were vivid and detailed, but reading them felt like trying to remember someone else's dreams. I don't remember ever coming back. But I must have, because here I am, standing in a hallway that takes 17 steps to traverse, breathing air that tastes of metal and overripe fruit. The walls lean in slightly, drawn by some gravitational force that has nothing to do with physics. The person from my dreams stands just outside my peripheral vision, patient and persistent, waiting for me to remember what I've forgotten. The lights behind the trees pulse with gentle insistence, visible only when I'm not looking for them. They're calling again, or maybe they never stopped calling. The orange scent grows stronger, more concentrated, creating pathways through the air that lead towards something I can't quite name. I walk toward the window, my reflection lagging several seconds behind. The oak tree waits in the backyard, its branches perfectly ordinary in the failing light. But I can feel the opening between them, the space where the world becomes negotiable, where time and distance and the fundamental nature of reality become subject to revision. The noise didn't come from outside. It comes from the spaces between thoughts, from the hollow places in memory where experiences too large for normal consciousness go to hide. It's calling me back to a place I never fully left, to complete a journey that began the moment I first caught the scent of overripe oranges in a hallway that takes 17 steps to cross. I shouldn't follow it, but I will. Story 8. I mentioned I'd only stayed on the ground floor, that the rain had kept me near the entrance, away from anything more. They seemed satisfied, jotting notes in rhythm with the drizzle outside. Yet the damp scent of old wood lingered on my fingertips, stubborn and telling. The stairs had creaked a note that still echoed in my mind, carrying the weight of untold steps. A slight drift brushed my cheek with the chill of an unwelcome memory. The hallway light flickered, casting shadows that knew my path. I didn't mention the door half ajar, or the coat beside it, but the mud was drying on my shoes. Nothing happened that night. I want to make that clear from the start. I didn't see anything unusual, didn't experience anything out of the ordinary. It was just a regular evening, the kind where you might get caught in unexpected weather and need to find shelter. That's all it was. A simple case of being in the wrong place at an inconvenient moment. The building was empty, of course, had been for months, maybe longer. I wouldn't have gone inside if I'd thought anyone was there. I'm not the type to intrude or cause trouble. The front door was already open, swaying gently in the wind. That's the only reason I stepped inside, to get out of the rain, nothing more. I didn't see anything. The lobby was what you'd expect from an abandoned place. Dust particles floating in the dim light from the street, old furniture covered in sheets, that musty smell of neglect, perfectly normal. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, just waiting for the worst of the storm to pass. The thunder was getting louder, but that's typical for that kind of weather system. It was just my imagination when I thought I heard footsteps above me. Old buildings settle, especially in storms. The wood expands and contracts, creating sounds that can seem almost deliberate if you're not thinking clearly. And I was tired, had been walking for hours trying to find the right address. Fatigue can play tricks on your mind, make you perceive things that aren't really there. The staircase curved up into darkness, its banister worn smooth by countless hands. Not that I paid much attention to it. I was focused on staying dry, on waiting out the weather. But I couldn't help noticing how the steps seemed to gleam despite the poor lighting, as if they'd been polished recently, which was odd for an empty building, but probably just a trick of the shadows. I never went upstairs, that's important to remember. I stayed right there in the entrance area near the door, ready to leave as soon as the rain let up. So I can't explain why I have such a clear memory of the second-floor hallway with its faded wallpaper and the way the floorboards creaked in a specific pattern. 3 short sounds, then silence, then 2 longer ones, like a code almost. But I wasn't there to hear it. The coat hanging on the newel post was brown leather, worn at the elbows, with brass buttons that caught what little light filtered through the grimy windows. It smelled like rain and something else, something metallic that reminded me of old coins. The pockets bulged slightly as if they contained personal items. Keys, maybe, or loose change. I didn't touch it, of course. Didn't even get close enough to see it clearly. It must have been a dream. Sometimes when you're very tired, your mind creates false memories, fills in details that seem real but couldn't possibly be accurate. That would explain why I remember the texture of the wallpaper so vividly, the way it felt slightly damp under my fingertips as I steadied myself on the stairs I never climbed. The pattern was roses, faded pink roses on a cream background, and in several places the paper had started to peel away from the wall in long, deliberate strips. The door at the end of the hall was painted blue, not a bright blue, but the color of deep water, of places where light doesn't penetrate easily. It was slightly ajar, just enough to reveal a sliver of the room beyond. I could see part of a window, rain streaming down the glass in patterns that seemed too regular to be natural. And there was a chair, positioned so that whoever sat in it would be facing the door, watching, waiting. I wasn't there, I never saw that door, never noticed how the brass handle had been turned recently, leaving fingerprints in the accumulated dust. Never observed how the hinges moved without making a sound, as if they'd been carefully oiled. Never felt the strange warmth that seemed to radiate from the gap, even though the rest of the building was cold and damp. Most likely just a reflection from the street lights. The silence in that hallway was different from normal quiet. It felt intentional, constructed, as if someone had carefully removed all the usual sounds you'd expect in an old building. No settling wood, no distant traffic, no whisper of wind through cracks in the walls. Just this heavy, expectant stillness that seemed to press against your eardrums. But I was downstairs the whole time, so I wouldn't know about that. I remember checking my phone to see how long I'd been waiting, but the screen remained black no matter how many times I pressed the power button. The battery had been nearly full when I'd entered the building, but electronics can be unpredictable in storms. All that electromagnetic activity in the atmosphere, it's perfectly reasonable that it would malfunction. Though I can't explain why, when I finally got it working again much later, there were photos in the gallery that I didn't remember taking. Images of that blue door, of the hallway with its rose wallpaper, of a window where something pale moved behind the rain-streaked glass. The metadata showed they'd been taken during the exact period when my phone wasn't working. Technology glitches happen all the time. The smell was the strangest part, though I'm sure it was just the combination of old wood and dampness creating an unusual odor. It reminded me of hospitals, that antiseptic scent mixed with something organic and warm. Like breath, almost, or the way skin smells when it's been under bandages for too long. It grew stronger as I stood there in the lobby, as if it were moving, searching. But smells don't move. They dissipate and fade. They don't follow you or seem to recognize your presence. I didn't go upstairs. I want to emphasize that again because it's important. I never left the ground floor, never walked down that hallway with its deliberate silence and watching walls. Never approached that blue door or heard the soft sound it made when it opened wider, just a few inches, just enough to reveal more of the room beyond. The chair was occupied. I mean, it would have been if I'd actually seen it, which I didn't. But in the dream I must have had while standing there in the lobby, while my tired mind conjured false images to fill the time, the chair wasn't empty anymore. Someone was sitting in it, facing the door, facing the hallway where I wasn't standing. I couldn't see their face. The light from the window was behind them, creating a silhouette that could have been anyone. Could have been me even if you looked at it from the right angle. The same height, the same general build, but that's probably just how dreams work, projecting yourself into imaginary scenarios. They were very still, unnaturally still, like a photograph or a painting. Their hands rested on the arms of the chair in a position that suggested patience, as if they'd been waiting for a very long time and were prepared to wait much longer. Their head was tilted slightly, listening, though there was nothing to hear in that constructed silence. Nothing happened, nothing was happening, nothing was going to happen. The rain had stopped while I wasn't paying attention, though I couldn't remember hearing it fade away. One moment it was drumming against the windows, the next there was only the sound of water dripping from the eaves. That's when I decided to leave, to continue on my way to wherever I'd been going before the storm forced me to take shelter. I walked to the door, the same door I'd entered through, though it seemed heavier now, more reluctant to open. The hinges protested with a sound like a sigh, like disappointment. Outside, the street was empty and clean, washed by the rain, with no evidence that the storm had ever occurred. But as I stepped onto the sidewalk, I could feel eyes watching me from the second-floor window, not looking down at me exactly, but observing, cataloging, remembering. When I turned back to glance at the building, the window was dark and empty, just a reflection of clouds and sky. It was just my imagination. I found the address I'd been looking for 3 blocks away. The meeting went well, routine business, nothing worth remembering in detail. The people there were friendly and professional, and no one mentioned that I was late or that my clothes were damp. No one asked where I'd been or why I seemed distracted. They didn't notice the mud on my shoes, which was strange because I'd been careful to avoid puddles on my way over. The mud was dark and rich, the kind you'd find in a basement or cellar, places where water collects and soil turns thick and organic. But I hadn't been in any basements, hadn't even known the building had a lower level. The basement door was behind the stairs, painted the same color as the walls so it nearly disappeared in the dim light. I definitely didn't see it, didn't notice how the paint was newer than the rest of the building, as if someone had recently tried to conceal the entrance. Didn't observe the way the handle turned easily despite the door's apparent age, or how the air that drifted up from below carried that same antiseptic smell mixed with something warmer, more personal. I never went down those steps, never felt my way along the rough stone walls, never heard my footsteps echo in the space beneath the building. Never discovered the room at the bottom, with its single bulb casting harsh shadows and its collection of chairs arranged in a careful circle. All the chairs were facing inward, toward the center of the room where someone had scratched marks into the concrete floor. Not random scratches, but deliberate patterns that seemed to have meaning, though I couldn't interpret what they were trying to communicate. The scratches were fresh, the concrete dust still pale and powdery around the edges. But I wasn't there to see them. One of the chairs was different from the others, newer, with padding that looked recently added. It was positioned so that whoever sat in it would be able to see everyone else in the circle, but the others would have to turn to look back. A position of observation, of control. The padding was still warm when I didn't touch it. I left the building through the front door, the same way I'd entered, and continued with my evening as if nothing unusual had occurred. Because nothing had occurred. It was just a brief shelter from the rain, a few minutes of waiting in an empty lobby while the storm passed overhead. I didn't think about it again for days. Didn't wake up in the middle of the night with the taste of that antiseptic smell in my mouth. Didn't find myself drawing patterns on paper that matched the scratches in the concrete floor I'd never seen. Didn't catch myself checking my phone for photos that shouldn't exist, images of places I'd never been and things I'd never witnessed. The dreams started later, but dreams aren't real. They're just your mind processing random information, creating stories out of fragments and impressions. The fact that they were so detailed, so consistent, so vivid that I could smell the dampness and feel the warmth radiating from that blue door doesn't mean anything significant. Dreams can seem very real when you're experiencing them. In the dreams, I go back to the building, not because I want to, but because I have to, because something is unfinished, something is waiting. The front door is always open, swaying in a wind I can't feel. The lobby is exactly as I remember it, though I try to tell myself I'm not remembering, just imagining. The coat is still there, hanging on the newel post, still smelling of rain and metal. The pockets still bulge with mysterious contents that I'm not supposed to investigate, but in the dreams I'm not bound by the same rules as waking life. In the dreams I can touch things, explore, discover. The keys in the pocket are old and heavy, made of a metal that feels warm against my skin. Each one is different, designed for different locks, different doors, different secrets. They jangle softly when I move, a sound like wind chimes made of bones. But dreams aren't real, so the keys aren't real either. I always wake up before I can use them, before I can discover what they unlock. I wake up with my hands clenched into fists, as if I'm still holding something precious and dangerous. The sensation fades quickly, the way dream sensations do, leaving only the memory of weight and warmth. Nothing happened that night, nothing is happening now, nothing will happen in the future. I've driven past the building several times since then, just coincidentally, just because it's on the way to other places I need to go. It looks different in daylight, smaller and less imposing. The windows are boarded up now, and there's a sign posted near the entrance warning people to stay out. The sign is new, printed on bright white paper that stands out against the weathered wood of the building. But sometimes, when the light hits the windows just right, I think I can see movement behind the boards. Just shadows, probably, or reflections of passing clouds. Nothing deliberate, nothing aware. The building is scheduled for demolition soon. I read about it in the local paper, just a small article buried in the back pages. The city council voted unanimously to tear it down, citing safety concerns and structural instability. The work will begin next week, assuming the weather cooperates. I won't be there to watch. I have no reason to be there, no connection to the place beyond those few minutes I spent sheltering from the rain. But I find myself thinking about it more often than I should, wondering what they'll find when they start tearing down the walls. Wondering if they'll discover the basement room with its circle of chairs and fresh scratches in the floor. Wondering if they'll find other rooms, other spaces that weren't visible from the outside. Wondering if they'll ask questions about what happened there, who was responsible, why it was allowed to continue for so long. But there's nothing to find because nothing happened. The dreams are getting more frequent now, more detailed. Last night I dreamed that I had a key to the building, that I could come and go as I pleased. In the dream, I knew exactly which stairs to avoid so they wouldn't creak, which floorboards were loose, how to open that blue door without making a sound. In the dream, the person in the chair turned around to look at me. Their face was familiar, though I couldn't place where I might have seen it before. They smiled and gestured to an empty chair in the circle, as if they'd been expecting me, as if my arrival was part of a plan that had been in motion for a very long time. I woke up before I could sit down, before I could become part of whatever was happening in that basement room. But the feeling lingered, the sense that I belonged there, that I had responsibilities and obligations I'd been neglecting. It was just a dream, though. Dreams don't create real obligations. The demolition has been delayed, something about permits and environmental assessments, the usual bureaucratic complications. The building will stand for at least another month, maybe longer. The article didn't specify exactly what the delay was about, just mentioned that additional inspections were required. I don't know why that news made me feel relieved. Tonight I'm planning to drive past the building again, just to see if anything has changed. Not because I'm curious or concerned, just because it's a convenient route to where I need to go. If I happen to notice that the front door is open again, swaying in the evening breeze, I'll probably just keep driving. Probably. But I've been carrying those keys in my pocket all day, the ones from the dream that aren't supposed to be real. They jangle softly when I walk, a familiar sound that makes me think of wind chimes in basement rooms and chairs arranged in careful circles. I should throw them away, but I can't quite bring myself to do it. They feel too important, too necessary. Like tools I'm going to need very soon for a job I don't remember accepting but can't refuse to complete. Nothing happened that night, but tonight might be different. Story 9. Notification light didn't blink. My fingers brushed the screen, seeking the familiar vibration, but it remained inert, unresponsive. The chair creaked under my weight without the usual reassuring groan, as though it too held its breath. The room drew in closer, the quiet pressing at the edges, and when I expected the familiar hum of distant traffic, there was only a void. I focused on the wallpaper's pattern, each line and swirl pretending, as if any moment they might shift and betray their true design. The absence filled the space, tangible, as if daring me to acknowledge what had ceased to exist. Sleep doesn't come anymore, not the way it used to. I lie in bed counting the hours until dawn, listening to sounds that shouldn't be there. The refrigerator hums at frequencies that make my teeth ache. The floorboards settle with deliberate precision, as though something is learning the weight and rhythm of my movements. Even my own breathing feels foreign, too loud in the thick silence that wraps around this place like a second skin. The mirror in the bathroom reflects everything correctly, but there's a delay now. A split second where my reflection hesitates before following my movements. I've stopped looking directly at it. Instead, I focus on the sink, the faucet, the small chip in the porcelain that I never noticed before. These details anchor me to something real, something that existed before everything changed. My hands shake when I hold things now, not from fear exactly, but from a tremor that starts deep in my bones. The tremor began after I came back from that place, though I can't say precisely when it started. Time moves differently now. Minutes stretch like hours, and sometimes entire afternoons disappear without explanation. I'll be sitting at the kitchen table, and suddenly the light outside has shifted from afternoon gold to evening gray, with no memory of the transition. People don't believe me when I try to explain. They nod politely and suggest I see someone, get help, take time to recover from whatever stress I've been under, but they weren't there. They didn't see what I saw, didn't feel the air itself change texture, didn't experience the moment when the world revealed its hidden machinery. The dreams come in fragments. I'm standing in an open space, looking up at something that shouldn't exist in our sky. The object hovers without sound, without the mechanical noise you'd expect from something so large. It's perfectly still, yet somehow alive, breathing with a rhythm that matches my heartbeat. The surface reflects no light, absorbing everything around it like a wound in the fabric of the night. I remember reaching out toward it, though I can't recall making the decision to move. My arm extends upward, and for a moment that stretches into eternity, I feel connected to something vast and incomprehensible. The sensation is neither pleasant nor unpleasant, simply overwhelming in its completeness. Every nerve ending fires at once, every thought dissolves into static, and I become something else entirely. When I try to remember what happened next, the memory fractures. There are gaps, spaces where time should be but isn't. I know I was there in that place for longer than the few minutes my watch claimed had passed. I know things were done to me, or with me, or through me. But the specifics slide away like water through my fingers, leaving only the certainty that I am no longer entirely myself. The symptoms started small. Electronics would malfunction in my presence, screens flickering to life without being touched, radios cycling through stations on their own. Street lights would dim as I passed beneath them, then brighten again once I'd moved on. I told myself these were coincidences, power grid fluctuations, old wiring in an aging neighborhood. But the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every device I touched would develop the same peculiar behavior. They would function normally for others, but in my hands they would display readings that made no sense. Digital clocks would show impossible times. Phones would dial numbers I'd never seen before. Computers would open files that didn't exist in their memory. The humming started around the same time. A low-frequency vibration that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. At first I thought it might be the building's ventilation system or nearby construction, but the sound followed me. It was there in every room, every building, every space I occupied. A constant drone that sat just at the edge of hearing, felt more than heard. I began to notice other changes in my environment. Shadows would fall in directions that defied the light sources. Reflections in windows would show details that weren't actually there. The air itself felt thicker, more viscous, as though I was moving through something denser than normal atmosphere. Even water tasted different, carrying a metallic aftertaste that lingered for hours. Going back further, I remember the night it happened. I was alone in that remote place, surrounded by the kind of darkness you only find far from civilization. The stars were brilliant overhead, unmarred by light pollution, forming patterns I'd studied since childhood but which now seemed somehow wrong, rearranged in subtle ways that my rational mind couldn't accept. The silence was absolute. No insects, no wind, no distant traffic or human activity, just the soft sound of my own breathing and the occasional pop from the dying fire. I should have found this peaceful, but instead it felt expectant, as though the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something to begin. The first sign was a change in the air pressure. My ears popped without warning, and suddenly every sound became muffled, distant. The fire's crackling faded to a whisper. My own movement seemed to happen in slow motion, each gesture requiring tremendous effort to complete. Even my thoughts felt sluggish, wrapped in cotton, struggling to form coherent patterns. Then came the smell, ozone, sharp and electric, like the air after a lightning strike. But there was no storm, no clouds in the clear night sky. The scent grew stronger, mixing with something metallic, something that reminded me of heated copper or fresh blood. It filled my nostrils and seemed to coat the inside of my mouth, leaving a taste that would linger for days afterward. The temperature began to fluctuate wildly. One moment I was shivering in the sudden cold that seemed to leach all warmth from the air. The next, waves of heat washed over me, making my skin prickle with sweat. These changes came without pattern or warning, as though the very atmosphere around me was being manipulated by forces I couldn't comprehend. I remember looking up at the stars and realizing they were moving. Not the slow, predictable movement of celestial bodies, but a deliberate shifting, as though the entire sky was being rearranged by invisible hands. Constellations I'd known since childhood stretched and warped, their familiar patterns dissolving into chaos before reforming into configurations that hurt to look at directly. The ground beneath my feet began to vibrate, not the sharp tremor of an earthquake, but a steady, rhythmic pulse that seemed to rise from deep within the earth. The vibration traveled up through my bones, resonating in my chest cavity, making my heart struggle to maintain its natural rhythm. Every object around me began to hum in harmony with this underground frequency. Even earlier, before the obvious strangeness began, there were signs I should have recognized. The wildlife had gone silent hours before, not gradually as night fell, but all at once, as though responding to some signal I couldn't detect. The usual chorus of crickets and night birds simply stopped, leaving an unnatural quiet that should have warned me something was wrong. My equipment had been acting strangely all day. The compass needle spun lazily without settling on any particular direction. The radio picked up only static, no matter which frequency I tried. My watch kept losing time, falling minutes behind without explanation, as though time itself was becoming unreliable in this place. I'd felt nauseous since arriving, a persistent queasiness that no amount of water or rest could alleviate. My vision seemed slightly off, colors appearing more saturated than normal, edges of objects shimmering as though seen through heat waves. When I tried to focus on distant landmarks, they seemed to shift position, making navigation increasingly difficult. The very air felt different here, thicker, somehow more substantial, as though it contained particles or energies that didn't belong in our normal atmosphere. Each breath required conscious effort, and I found myself taking deeper, more deliberate inhalations just to feel like I was getting enough oxygen. Even the light seemed wrong, the shadows falling at angles that didn't match the sun's position. But before all of this, before the strangeness took hold, it had been a perfect day. The kind of day that makes you grateful to be alive, to be conscious, to be part of the vast machinery of existence. The sky was clear, the temperature mild, the landscape spread out before me like a painting of everything peaceful and right with the world. I'd chosen this place for its isolation, its distance from the complications of modern life. The silence here was supposed to be restorative, the darkness a canvas for contemplation. I'd come seeking solitude, seeking the kind of clarity that only comes when you strip away all the noise and distraction of civilization. The evening had begun like any other. I'd watched the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. The transition from day to night was gradual, gentle, exactly as it should be. Nothing in those peaceful moments suggested that the fundamental nature of reality was about to reveal itself as far more fragile than I'd ever imagined. As I sit here now, remembering that last moment of normalcy, I can feel it beginning again. The air pressure is changing. The electronic devices around me are starting to flicker. Somewhere in the distance, that familiar humming is rising, calling me back to complete what was started in that remote place under the shifting stars. They're coming back for me, Story 10. The initial assessment showed all windows latched securely. Furniture placement appeared untouched, with chairs aligned to the dining table and the sofa free of debris. A calendar on the wall noted dates without any markings beyond printed numbers. In the kitchen, utensils were stowed correctly, though a single plate remained on the countertop, devoid of residue. The refrigerator hummed at the expected decibel level, yet its contents failed to match inventory records. The hallway carpet was vacuumed, leaving uniform lines, yet the air felt colder than usual. The ceiling fan was off, but the blades rotated slowly. That's what they wrote in their report, cold, clinical words that strip away everything that mattered, everything that actually happened. I've carried those sentences in my head for so long now, like a scar that won't fade. They sound so reasonable, don't they? So normal, but they weren't there when the air itself seemed to thicken. They didn't feel what I felt. I'm recording this because I need to finally tell someone, anyone. It's been years since I lived in that house, and I thought distance would help. I thought if I moved far enough away, got a new job, started fresh, the memories would lose their grip on me. But some things follow you no matter how far you run. Some things live inside you now. My hands are shaking as I speak into this microphone. I've started this recording maybe 20 times, and each time I've deleted it before getting past the first few words. But tonight feels different. Tonight I can't sleep anyway, so maybe it's time. The house was supposed to be a new beginning. After the divorce, after losing the job, after everything fell apart, I needed somewhere quiet to rebuild. The rental was perfect on paper. 2 bedrooms, small yard, decent neighborhood. The landlord seemed eager to rent it out, which should have been my first warning. Places that are too good to be true usually are. I moved in during the summer. The first few weeks were exactly what I'd hoped for, peaceful. I'd wake up to birds chirping, make coffee in the sunny kitchen, spend my day's job hunting from the dining room table. The house felt welcoming, like it was glad to have someone living in it again. I even started sleeping better than I had in months. The routine was simple. I'd wake up around 7, check my email, make breakfast. The kitchen had this large window that faced east, and the morning light would stream in and make everything feel hopeful. I'd sit at that little table with my laptop, sending out resumes, making calls, normal things. Life was starting to feel manageable again. But houses have their own rhythms, don't they? Their own sounds and smells and ways of settling. After a few weeks, you learn what's normal. The refrigerator cycling on and off, the floorboards creaking when the temperature changes, the way the pipes gurgle when the neighbors run their water. I thought I was learning this house's patterns. That's why the first strange thing bothered me so much. It was such a small detail, but it didn't fit the pattern I'd come to expect. I was making lunch one afternoon when I noticed the ceiling fan in the living room was moving. Just barely, the blades turning so slowly you had to stare to be sure they were moving at all. But I knew I hadn't turned it on. I never used the ceiling fans during the day. The house stayed cool enough on its own. I walked over and checked the switch. It was in the off position. I flicked it up and down a few times, and the fan responded normally, spinning fast when on, stopping completely when off. Must have been a draft, I told myself. Old houses are full of air currents you don't notice. But over the next few days, I found myself glancing at that fan more often. And more than once, I caught it turning those slow, lazy rotations when the switch was off. Never when I was looking directly at it from the beginning, only when I'd glance over and notice the movement. I started keeping mental notes. The fan would be still when I left the room, but moving when I returned. It never spun fast, never made noise. Just that gentle, almost hypnotic rotation, like it was being turned by invisible fingers. I called the landlord about it. He said old ceiling fans sometimes do that when the bearings are worn. Gravity and tiny vibrations can make the blades drift. It made sense. I felt silly for even mentioning it. But then I started noticing other things. The kitchen plate, for instance. Every morning there would be a single clean plate sitting on the counter next to the sink. Not in the dish rack where I always put clean dishes. Not in the cabinet where it belonged. Just sitting there on the counter, perfectly clean and dry. At first I assumed I was forgetting to put it away. Stress can make you absent-minded, and I was still adjusting to living alone again. But I started paying attention, making sure to put all dishes away before bed. I'd check the counter twice, sometimes 3 times, empty and clean. Yet every morning there it was, the same plate, always in the same spot. I began to dread walking into the kitchen. That plate became like a daily reminder that something in the house wasn't following the rules I understood. It was such a small thing, but it felt deliberate, like someone was trying to tell me something or test whether I was paying attention. The smell started around the same time, sweet and metallic, like copper pennies mixed with vanilla extract. It would appear suddenly, usually when I was walking down the hallway between the living room and bedrooms. I'd catch a whiff and stop, trying to identify it, but by the time I really focused on it, the smell would be gone. I checked everywhere for the source, under sinks, in closets, behind appliances. I thought maybe there was a gas leak or something rotting in the walls, but I could never find anything, and the smell never lingered long enough for me to really track it down. The house felt different now. What had seemed welcoming before now felt watchful. I'd sit at my laptop, trying to concentrate on job applications, but I kept finding myself looking over my shoulder. The sensation of being observed became constant, like an itch I couldn't scratch. I started staying out later, finding excuses to avoid being home during the quiet hours. I'd go to coffee shops, browse bookstores, take long drives, anything to delay returning to that increasingly uncomfortable space. But you can't avoid your own home forever. One evening I was in the bathroom getting ready for bed when I heard it for the first time. A low humming sound, almost below the range of hearing. I had to hold my breath and strain to make sure I wasn't imagining it. It seemed to come from inside the walls themselves, like the house's electrical system was singing. I stood there in my pajamas, ear pressed to the bathroom wall, trying to locate the source. The humming would fade in and out, never quite the same pitch. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from the bedroom, sometimes from the kitchen. It was like the sound was moving through the house's bones. When I mentioned it to my neighbor, she looked at me strangely. She'd lived next door for 15 years, she said, and had never heard any unusual sounds from that house. But then she added something that made my skin crawl. She said the previous tenant had moved out suddenly, in the middle of the night, leaving most of his belongings behind. That night the humming was louder. I lay in bed listening to it travel through the walls, a slow, pulsing tone that seemed to be getting closer to my bedroom. I pulled the covers over my head like a child, but I could still hear it, feel it almost vibrating through the mattress and into my bones. I didn't sleep much after that. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and growing unease. The ceiling fan spun constantly now, even with the switch off. The plate appeared every morning without fail. The sweet metallic smell grew stronger and more frequent, and the humming became part of the house's nightly routine, starting around 10 p.m. and continuing until dawn. I was losing weight, losing focus. Job interviews went poorly because I looked tired and distracted. Friends stopped calling because I'd become withdrawn and jumpy. The house was consuming me bit by bit, and I felt powerless to stop it. But I wasn't ready to admit what was really happening. Not yet. I kept telling myself there were rational explanations. Old houses make strange sounds. Memory can play tricks when you're stressed. I was probably having some kind of breakdown, and my mind was creating problems where none existed. Then came the night that changed everything. I was lying in bed listening to the now familiar humming when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate steps on the carpet I'd vacuumed that afternoon. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was walking back and forth outside my bedroom door. I held my breath and listened. Step, 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 pause, step, 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 pause, like someone pacing, thinking, deciding what to do next. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. I wanted to call out, to demand to know who was in my house, but my voice was frozen in my throat. Instead, I lay there paralyzed, listening to those measured footsteps continue their patient circuit. After what felt like hours, the footsteps stopped. The humming faded. The house fell into the kind of deep silence that feels unnatural, like the air itself is holding its breath. I didn't move until sunrise. When I finally worked up the courage to open my bedroom door, the hallway was empty. But the carpet showed fresh vacuum lines, perfectly straight and uniform, as if someone had cleaned it in the middle of the night. That's when I knew I had to leave. I called the landlord that morning and told him I was breaking the lease. Family emergency, I said. I'd forfeit the deposit and pay whatever penalties were necessary, but I had to move out immediately. He didn't seem surprised. I packed my things that day while the sun was still up, throwing clothes and books into boxes without any organization. I wanted to be gone before dark, before the humming started, before whatever lived in that house woke up for another night. As I loaded the last box into my car, I looked back at the house one final time. In the front window, I could see the ceiling fan turning its slow, hypnotic circles. Even from outside, even in daylight, it was moving. That was years ago. I've lived in 3 different cities since then, always choosing places far from where that house sits. I've tried therapy, medication, meditation. I've told myself that whatever happened was just stress, just my mind creating monsters where none existed. But I still wake up sometimes to the sound of footsteps in hallways that don't exist. I still catch whiffs of that sweet metallic smell when I'm alone in quiet spaces. And sometimes, when I'm not paying attention, I'll walk into my kitchen and find a clean plate sitting on the counter where it doesn't belong. The worst part is the dreams. I dream that I'm back in that house, but now I understand what it wanted. I dream that the humming is actually a voice, speaking words in a language I almost recognize. I dream that the footsteps weren't trying to frighten me, but to invite me to join whatever walks those halls in the dark. And sometimes in those dreams I do join them. I open my bedroom door and step into that hallway, and I finally see what was waiting for me all along. But I always wake up before I can remember what I saw. I'm telling you this because I need someone else to know, because even though I'm hundreds of miles away, even though I live in a bright apartment with thin walls and noisy neighbors, I don't think I ever really left that house. Not all of me. Sometimes I catch myself humming without realizing it, and the tune is always the same low, pulsing tone that used to come from those walls. Sometimes I arrange things in my apartment without thinking about it, creating those same perfect, uniform patterns. And sometimes, late at night when I'm trying to fall asleep, I can swear I hear the soft whisper of ceiling fan blades cutting through still air. I thought distance would save me. I thought if I never talked about what happened, it would lose its power over me. But some experiences don't stay in the past where they belong. Some experiences follow you home, no matter how far you travel. And as I sit here recording this, I'm starting to realize that maybe I never really left that house at all. Maybe I'm still lying in that bedroom, listening to footsteps in the hall, and everything since then has been just another dream. The humming is getting louder now. Even here, even now, I can hear it starting up again. And I'm afraid that if I stop talking, if I let the silence settle in, I'll hear those footsteps coming down my new hallway, patient and persistent as ever. Because whatever was in that house, whatever wanted my attention so desperately, I don't think it's done with me yet.